Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. Good evening. I'm sending you this story because I think it'll leave your listeners with chills running down their spines, just like I get every time I remember each detail. When my cousin Marcus and I were in our early 20s, we used to take camping trips through North Carolina. This must have been when I was 22, and he was 23, deep in the Pisgah National Forest. For me, it was my first time there. For Marcus, not so much. Since our jobs gave us weekdays off, we'd use those days to escape the rush and chaos of city life. Marcus always led these adventures. He was the experienced one, with his Boy Scout background. We parked the car near a trailhead and hiked into the woods. After about 45 minutes of walking, we found what seemed like the ideal spot, a spacious clearing perfect for setting up 2 tents, a camp stove, and a campfire. We started unloading our gear. Setting up the tents was our first task, and Marcus, as always, was incredibly fast. His tent was ready in just a few minutes, while I, clumsy as ever, took over 20 minutes. Honestly, that was one of the last times I did that in my life. With the tents set up, we prepared the fire pit. We gathered twigs and wood pieces, while Marcus, always prepared, brought a lighter fluid and matches, modern conveniences that made things easier. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we lit the fire and started preparing dinner. Charlie took charge of cooking, as always. He loved to make elaborate meals and was amazing at outdoor cooking. He prepared steaks and burgers, and we had bear spray nearby just as a precaution in case any bears were interested in the smell. But Marcus always said bears were rare. The real danger came from people. While we devoured our food, we opened some beers and played classic rock from a portable speaker. It's hard to describe the feeling of those moments in nature with someone close sharing stories, enjoying music, and breathing fresh air. Later, in the darkness, we set up a folding table to play cards. After several rounds of traditional games, we broke out Uno, and that's when something strange happened. In the middle of the game, an unexpected sound came from the forest. Someone humming. I stopped the music on my phone, and the silence only made the sound clearer. Footsteps and light singing coming from somewhere among the trees, out of our sight. Marcus asked me to grab the flashlight, but by the time I found it, everything had gone quiet. I asked if we should be worried, and he said it wasn't common to find someone so deep in the woods, especially at night, walking near a camp with a fire burning and humming like that. We both got tense. We tried to return to the game, but with the music much lower this time. When we were just starting to relax, something large crashed into the center of our campsite, startling us immediately. It wasn't something that fell from a tree. Someone clearly threw it. Marcus didn't hesitate and shouted, "Whoever's out there, grow up and get lost." We heard footsteps retreating, getting more distant until silence took over again. I suggested we pack up and move to another location, but Marcus was firm. Absolutely not. In the dark, it's too dangerous. We had our bear sprays, and he suggested I keep mine nearby inside the tent. It was the only thing we had for defense at a distance. Despite the tension, sounds of branches breaking continued in the distance. But they weren't typical animal movements. There was someone, maybe more than one person, clearly nearby. We knew we'd have to sleep at some point, so we agreed to take shifts keeping watch. Charlie volunteered for the first watch. He said he'd read a bit while I tried to sleep. I was in my sleeping bag in no time and dozed off quickly. Waking up in the middle of the night while camping isn't unusual. The cold, discomfort, or some sound usually interrupts sleep. In that moment, I didn't know what had woken me. My mind was still slow, confused. When I opened my eyes, I saw a head peering through my tent entrance. At first, I thought it was Marcus. I blinked several times trying to clear my vision, but the face was hidden in darkness. I mumbled, "Marcus, is it my turn?" My voice was still heavy with sleep. As my eyes focused, I realized the head remained motionless for several seconds, watching me in silence. Suddenly, the tent zipper closed, and the figure vanished. I lay there for a moment trying to understand what had happened, until reality hit me like lightning. I jumped out of my sleeping bag and heard footsteps moving away. I called for Marcus, but no response came. I stepped out of the tent and looked around. The fire was completely out, and Marcus wasn't outside. I went to his tent, which was closed, and when I opened it, I found him sound asleep. A chill ran down my spine. Fear took over. Who or what had been spying through my tent? I shook Marcus until he woke. He needed a moment to understand what I was saying. But when the situation became clear, he grabbed the bear spray and admitted he must have accidentally fallen asleep while reading. He suggested, "You should sleep in my tent tonight." But that meant getting my sleeping bag. He came out with me and kept watch while I ran to my tent to get it. While I was inside, I heard again that terrifying sound of someone humming outside. I grabbed what I needed and rushed out. Marcus, visibly tense, whispered, "Hurry up." "Did you hear that too?" I nodded in agreement. We returned to his tent, zipped it closed, and settled in. The sprays were by our side. At that moment, I desperately wished a bear would show up and solve our problem. The hours dragged on. I stayed awake while Marcus slept. After what felt like an endless shift, I woke him so we could switch. He woke me again around dawn. Light was starting to filter through the forest, and we quickly broke camp. With everything packed, it was bright enough to head back to the car. We could have driven somewhere else and camped again, but neither of us wanted anything to do with that anymore. That was without doubt a terrifying experience. I think deep down, both Marcus and I just wanted to return to the comfort and safety of our homes. 6 years have passed since that episode, and although he's invited me camping several times since, I've never found the desire to accept. After something like that, I realized what truly scares me isn't nature, it's people. To this day, I wonder why someone would be prowling around our campsite like that. And that image of the head at my tent entrance, watching me in the dark, still gives me chills. It's like something straight out of a nightmare. The truth is, I might never feel comfortable camping again. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. My name is Alessandra, and I come from New Orleans. Before continuing, it's essential to be clear. This story doesn't favor me in any way. I expect no sympathy or understanding. I'm not the victim here. What I learned from all of this is that envy can corrupt us deeply, transforming us into something dark and destructive. I was always an ordinary girl, nothing special. I never cared much about my appearance until my cousins started mocking me, especially Kelsey, one particular cousin. While I grew up shy and awkward, Kelsey was the very picture of beauty, caramel skin, striking eyes, sleek hair. She was admired by everyone, the center of attention at any family gathering. I, on the other hand, was just a blur in the background, a memory that remained. A moment that stayed with me was one Thanksgiving, when I was about 8 years old. My grandmother hosted dinner at her house, and almost all the cousins were present. While everyone played and laughed, I stayed on the sidelines. Kelsey made sure to remind everyone how ugly I was, how poorly my dress fit, and that no one would ever be interested in me. Even at such a young age, those words carved deep and visible, yet painful. Over time, Kelsey became even more beautiful. Every encounter with her was a cruel reminder of my insignificance. We didn't just see each other at family gatherings, but also at school, as we attended the same institution. Having her nearby every day was torment. The boys adored her, surrounded her constantly. I sought comfort in food, trying to ease my frustration. My parents didn't notice or didn't care much. They thought it was just a phase. But that phase launched me into a cycle of self-loathing, from which escape seemed impossible. Owen, one of the most popular boys at school, also studied in our class. He was every girl's dream, including mine. I knew he'd never notice me, but fantasizing was my only escape, a brief respite from the reality of always being the ugly duckling. Whenever I went to the store near my house, I passed by a park where kids my age gathered. Kelsey often hung out there, surrounded by friends, laughing and commenting on something. Whenever I passed, the laughter grew louder. As soon as I moved away, I felt a deep rage and suffocating frustration. Every night before sleeping, I wished to wake up different, someone who wouldn't be the subject of mockery. But in the morning, everything remained the same. One day, school organized a field trip to the Bayou forests. I didn't want to go, but my parents insisted, thinking it would be good for me. I ended up agreeing, but the trip was just an extension of my miserable routine. While others had fun, I tried to hide in a corner, invisible as always. There was even a party organized during the trip. I remained isolated until a teacher, perhaps out of pity, asked some classmates to invite me to dance. I agreed only to avoid trouble, but soon bitterly regretted it when the DJ started playing slow songs. The boys needed to switch partners every few minutes, but whenever it was my turn, they quickly left me to dance with other girls. Kelsey, of course, noticed everything and started laughing at me, accompanied by her friends. Humiliated and consumed by rage, I retreated to my room and stayed there crying until the end of the night. I wished my parents were there to pick me up, but I didn't have the courage to face the dangerous night roads. So I endured the 3 days in the bayou that felt more like an endless nightmare. Kelsey didn't miss a chance to reinforce my place of inferiority. Upon returning to New Orleans, something in me changed. I could no longer tolerate the hatred and envy I felt for Kelsey. She had planted within me a darkness that only grew over time. Some years later, my parents decided we needed a vacation. We went to Lafayette, a small town where distant relatives lived. There I met Maria, a cousin of my mother. From the beginning, I felt comfortable with her, something rare for me. For the first time in a long while, I felt I could open up to someone. I confided in Maria about Kelsey, about the years of torment she had caused me since we were children. I also shared my frustration about never having a boyfriend and feeling invisible to boys. Maria, a deeply spiritual woman who believed in energies, listened attentively. When I finished, she said something that completely changed my life. "You're carrying too much hatred inside, Alessandra. That weight can attract things you can't imagine." She looked at me with a firm, intense gaze. It wasn't pity I saw in her eyes, but something deeper, almost unsettling, as if she could see what I couldn't. After a long, uncomfortable silence, Maria began talking about a woman named Madame Louise who lived in a small settlement just a few miles from Lafayette. According to Maria, Madame Louise had spiritual gifts and had already helped many people transform their lives. But what caught my attention was when she mentioned that Madame Louise also worked with darker forces. Initially, I laughed at the idea. I didn't believe in any of that. But while Maria recounted the miracles Madame Louise supposedly performed, an idea began to form in my mind. What if it were really possible to change the course of my life? What if there was a way to make Kelsey pay for everything she put me through? The hatred I had carried for so many years took over each of my thoughts. I spent a few days deciding. One afternoon, after an intense fight with my parents about my future, I left home determined and went to Maria. I told her I was ready to meet Madame Louise. "This is not something to be done lightly," Maria warned me. "What you're asking can bring serious consequences. It's not a joke, Alessandra. If you go down this path, there's no turning back." I ignored her warnings. My decision was made. I needed to change my life at any cost. The next morning, Maria and I climbed into her old car, heading to the village where Madame Louise lived. The road was long and full of curves, with the scorching sun accompanying us the whole way. After hours of travel, we finally spotted a solitary cabin surrounded by withered trees and an atmosphere of abandonment that sent chills down my spine. The old, worn construction seemed pulled from another time. Upon crossing the door, I felt a shiver. The cabin's interior smelled strongly of incense and herbs. In the center of the small room, surrounded by black candles and charms, sat Madame Louise. She was an elderly woman in her 70s, with snow-white hair and an indecipherable expression. Without saying a word, she gestured for me to sit before her. The heavy atmosphere left me uneasy, but I remained firm, though my heart beat uncontrollably. With the coldest voice I could muster, I told her everything Kelsey had done to me over the years. Each phrase I spoke fed the hatred inside me, which seemed to grow more and more. Madame Louise remained silent, listening without showing any reaction. When I finished, she looked directly into my eyes and with a deep, grave voice declared, "What you desire isn't simple and far from safe. The hatred you carry has attracted dark forces. and they demand something in return. If you're willing to pay the price, I can help you." A shiver ran through my body, but without hesitation, I nodded. No matter the cost. All I wanted was to see Kelsey suffer as I had suffered. Madame Louise explained what she needed: an intimate piece of Kelsey's clothing. I found it strange, but she insisted it was essential for the ritual. In the following days, I devised a plan to get the item. I pretended to visit my aunt, Kelsey's mother, casually, taking advantage of a moment when Kelsey was distracted in another room. I snuck into her bedroom and grabbed something from her laundry basket. My heart raced, but I felt no guilt. I thought only of revenge. That same afternoon, I returned to the cabin and handed the item to Madame Louise. Her smile sent a shiver through me. She began assembling an altar with black candles, carved figures, and mysterious symbols I didn't understand. "Kneel before the altar," she ordered. She began murmuring words in a strange language. The air seemed denser, almost palpable, and I felt something invisible approaching me. A gust of icy wind swept through the environment, extinguishing some candles. My hands trembled, but I remained still. Madame Louise didn't stop for an instant, staying concentrated. When she finished, she opened her eyes and said firmly, "It is done. Within a few months, your cousin will begin to pay for everything she did. But remember, nothing is free. Don't come back here when the consequences appear." I left the cabin feeling strangely light, as if a great weight had been lifted from me. For the first time in years, I felt something close to relief. Now I just had to wait. I didn't care what was coming, as long as Kelsey paid for everything. The following months passed, without any significant events happening. I began to doubt what Madame Louise had done, thinking maybe it was all a sham. However, one afternoon while walking through the neighborhood, I encountered Kelsey's mother. Her face was pale, and her eyes revealed worry. She told me Kelsey had been experiencing inexplicable episodes of weakness and frequent fainting. No doctor could identify the cause, and Kelsey was losing weight alarmingly. Upon hearing the news, a strange sensation of dark triumph invaded me. I remained silent, but inside I felt taken by a morbid glee. Finally, the effects of the ritual were appearing. Kelsey, the perfect girl who had ruined my life, was now slowly deteriorating, as if something was consuming her from within. In the following weeks, the situation became even more desperate. Kelsey, who before was the most dazzling and lively person I knew, was unrecognizable. Her once vibrant skin turned pale and lifeless. Her hair, which she so proudly flaunted, began falling out in large clumps. My uncle and aunt, desperate, sought the best doctors, but no one could explain what was happening. All tests came back normal, but Kelsey continued worsening to the point where she could no longer get out of bed. Outwardly, I feigned concern when hearing updates about her condition. However, deep down, a dark part of me felt satisfied. Yet an unease began growing inside me. I knew I had done something terrible. I tried convincing myself that Kelsey deserved all of this, but something deeper whispered that I had crossed a line I should never have crossed. When Kelsey reached her most critical state, I decided to seek Madame Louise again. I needed to know if all this would end soon, if the punishment would be definitive. Although Kelsey had already lost the beauty that defined her, I wondered if she might someday recover. Upon arriving at Madame Louise's cabin, I perceived the atmosphere was even more oppressive than before. The woman who once inspired respect in me now observed me with eyes difficult to decipher, as if seeing something even I didn't understand. "What you desired has already been achieved," she said, while lighting a black candle on the altar. "But your heart is restless. You won't find answers here, Alessandra. The work is done, and the rest doesn't depend on me or the forces I invoked. The damage has been caused and will follow its course until the energies decide to end it." Her words didn't bring the relief I sought. Instead, they left me with an even greater sense of emptiness. The initial euphoria, the one I had felt seeing Kelsey wither, now gave way to a growing hole inside me. Kelsey was paying for what she did, but my life hadn't changed. In fact, I felt even worse than before. Months passed, and Kelsey was practically confined to bed. Her eyes, which once shone with arrogance and superiority, were now just empty windows, as if her soul had been torn out. My relatives tried everything: healers, priests, even exorcism rituals. Nothing seemed to work. She continued withering like a flower abandoned in the sun. One night, lying in my bed, I began reflecting on everything that had happened. Even without ever receiving an apology from Kelsey, and probably never would, I wondered if I would ever find peace. I realized her suffering didn't bring the satisfaction I expected. On the contrary, it seemed to corrode me even more. Instead of freeing me, all of this had imprisoned me in a new form of torment. The breaking point came on a silent early morning. I woke abruptly with the strange sensation of being watched. When I opened my eyes, a dark figure stood beside my bed. My heart almost stopped. I could neither move nor scream. The figure had no face, but I knew, somehow inexplicably, that it was smiling. An overwhelming cold took over my body, and the room seemed enveloped in a freezing darkness. I closed my eyes tightly, trying to believe it was just a nightmare. When I opened them again, the figure remained there, motionless. Suddenly, a low, sinister laugh echoed, making the figure disappear into the darkness. The fear, however, remained like a heavy presence. I spent the rest of the night awake, unable to close my eyes. Something was wrong. Something was after me. The next day, I went to Maria. I needed to share what had happened. I needed guidance. When I told her about the shadow figure and the constant fear, Maria looked at me with a seriousness that left me even more unsettled. "What you invoked wasn't limited to Kelsey," she said in a grave tone. "These energies have begun affecting you too. Dark forces always demand something in return. They don't distinguish between who suffers and who invoked them. They only seek more darkness to feed on." Her words deeply shook me. I tried maintaining calm, but I knew she was right. Since that night, the feeling of being followed by something dark became constant. I heard whispers in the shadows, saw figures moving in the corner of my eyes, and every night when I tried to sleep, the sensation of being watched became unbearable. A few days later, returning home after closing my store, I found my parents visibly worried. My mother, with tears in her eyes, told me Kelsey had been hospitalized urgently. Her body no longer responded, and she weighed less than 90 pounds. The doctors had no hope. I was overcome by a disconcerting mix of relief and guilt. The revenge seemed complete, but something was terribly wrong. Maria's words echoed in my mind, and the events around me only reinforced the feeling that I had lost control. While Kelsey languished in the hospital, my life became a constant nightmare. The shadows surrounding me and the whispers in the corners of the house became more intense. Each night was more unbearable than the previous one. One night I had a disturbing dream. I saw Kelsey in her hospital bed, pale, thin, with hollow, empty eyes. However, she smiled at me, a disturbing smile, as if she knew something I didn't. As if somehow she triumphed over my suffering, despite her condition. I woke sweating, feeling the crushing weight of guilt and fear. I could no longer ignore that the hatred I had cultivated was completely destroying me. Completely desperate, I decided to seek Madame Louise again. This time I wasn't seeking revenge or feeding hatred. I needed help, a way to escape the darkness in which I had plunged myself. My soul cried out for an exit before I was completely consumed. When I arrived at the cabin, Madame Louise received me with the same unshakable expression as always. However, there was something in her gaze that made me feel she already knew why I was there. "I knew you'd return," she said before I even explained. "The forces you awakened are ancient and voracious. They don't disappear easily. The price for what you did hasn't been completely collected yet." I felt a knot form in my chest. "What does this mean?" I asked with a trembling voice. "You fed the darkness for years, Alessandra. These energies don't stop until they consume everything they desire. Now they're not just after Kelsey, they surround you too." Her calm in saying this froze me to the bones. My hands began trembling. "Is there something I can do? Any way to undo this?" I pleaded. Madame Louise stared at me in silence for a moment, as if pondering something much greater than I could understand. "You can try purifying these energies, but it won't be simple. Sacrifices will be necessary. The spirits I invoked are relentless. They were fed by the hatred you planted and nurtured. To appease them, you'll need to offer something equally strong." My mind raced in all directions. I had no idea what such a great sacrifice meant, but I knew I couldn't continue living in that hell. Desperate, I asked her to show me what should be done. Madame Louise began preparing a new ritual, different from the first. The altar had white and red candles, surrounded by dried herbs and small crystals that glowed faintly in the cabin's light. The environment, though still heavy, wasn't as oppressive as the last time. There was something different, perhaps a hint of hope. She asked me to kneel before the altar and close my eyes. She began chanting prayers in a language I didn't recognize. Time dissolved. I didn't know if minutes or hours were passing. During the ritual, disturbing images invaded my mind. I saw shadows moving in the darkness, figures with distorted faces lurking from corners, and most disturbingly, Kelsey's face. It appeared repeatedly, staring at me like a living reminder of the evil I had done. When everything ended, Madame Louise opened her eyes and looked at me with crushing seriousness. "What you did cannot be completely undone. At most, you can try restoring some balance. But know this, the dark energies have already touched your life, and their marks will be permanent. They won't go away, but perhaps with effort, you can prevent them from completely consuming you." I left there with a sense of defeat. There were no promises of redemption. No guarantee I could escape the chaos I created. I could only try living with the weight of what I did and attempt not to destroy myself in the process. That night I stayed awake, fearing the shadows would return. In the days and weeks that followed, I tried resuming my life, though it was clear I would never be the same. Guilt and fear were now inseparable companions. I began visiting Kelsey in the hospital. My family was surprised. My mother believed it was out of concern, but deep down, I knew it was an attempt to face the creature I had become. Kelsey, so fragile and defenseless, was a cruel mirror of everything I had nurtured inside me for so long. Kelsey was no longer the strong, arrogant person I knew. Now she was just a shadow of herself, barely conscious of what was happening around her. The last time I saw her was the most disturbing. I sat by her bed and remained silent for a few minutes, just watching her. Her eyes were closed, and her breathing was slow and fragile. When I stood to leave, she suddenly opened her eyes and looked at me. It wasn't an ordinary look. It was as if she saw inside me, as if she knew exactly what I had done. "Why?" she murmured in an almost inaudible thread of voice. A shiver ran down my spine. I was speechless. How could I respond? How could I explain the unforgivable? I who had wished for her ruin, now couldn't face the consequence of my own hatred. I remained paralyzed, unable to say anything. Kelsey closed her eyes again, returning to her fragile state, but that moment haunted me for days. Her look, her question, everything echoed inside me, tearing pieces from what remained of my peace. I tried distracting myself with routine, managing my store and keeping busy, but the shadows never really went away. Nights were the worst. Every time I lay down, I felt something watching me from the darkest corner of the room. Sometimes a cold presence seemed to sit at the foot of the bed, motionless, silently waiting. When I closed my eyes, Kelsey's face appeared in my mind, distorted by pain, whispering that single word. "Why?" One night I woke with a start. The silence in the room was oppressive, and the air seemed freezing, as if something had drained all energy from the environment. I tried turning on the lamp, but it didn't work. That's when I noticed movement in the darkness. A tall, thin figure, undefined as if it were part of the shadows. Fear took over me. I was paralyzed, unable to move. The figure approached slowly. It had no face, just a dark void that seemed to swallow me. I tried screaming, but terror froze me completely. In that moment, I understood this presence would never leave me alone. Ever. The next morning, desperate, I went to Maria. Upon opening the door, she immediately noticed my state. "Alessandra, you look terrible." "What happened?" "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, worried. I told her everything, every detail. Her expression changed to something between sadness and resignation. "I warned you," she replied gravely. "I told you not to meddle with these forces. The energies you awakened don't disappear easily, and now they're after you. You must prepare for the worst, because these entities only feed on suffering." I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. "What can I do? Is there any way to end this?" I asked, almost begging. Maria looked at me seriously, maintaining silence for a few seconds before responding. "There is a way, but I can't recommend it without you knowing the risks. It's dangerous, and there's no guarantee it will work. However, if you continue like this, you might lose much more than your peace of mind. She explained there was an ancient cleansing ritual, but it required an immense sacrifice, something that deeply frightened me. The ritual would need to be performed at a sacred place in the depths of the Ozark Mountains, far from any civilization. The path would be difficult and the danger real. If something went wrong, not only would the ritual fail, but the entities could become even more powerful and aggressive. I knew I was cornered. I needed to decide whether to face the risk or continue being consumed by the shadows I myself had invoked. I remained motionless, absorbing the impact of her words. Would I be prepared to bet everything on trying to remedy the damage I caused? The odds were against me, but living in that torment was no longer an option. The incessant fear, crushing guilt, and feeling of being trapped in a downward spiral made life unsustainable. Finally, I decided to proceed with the ritual. I had nothing left to lose. The fear of remaining in that state outweighed my dread of facing the ritual itself. Maria, though hesitant, agreed to support me. She mentioned she would take me to a wise shaman living in the Arkansas mountains. This woman, according to her, possessed deep understanding of spirits and would be able to guide us in the ritual. The journey to the mountains was arduous and long. Maria drove for hours in her old car, climbing dirt roads and rocky trails, until we finally reached a small village where the shaman lived. Her dwelling was simple, made of stone, surrounded by imposing trees that seemed to guard centuries of stories. Grandmother Willow, as she was called, received us with unsettling serenity. Despite her advanced age, her eyes gleamed with an intensity that made me feel like she could see beyond the physical world. Maria narrated everything that had happened, and the elder listened attentively, nodding from time to time. At the end, she looked at me and declared, "Child, what you awakened is older than you can imagine. There is a way to appease them, but it won't be simple. You'll need to offer something of immense value." She explained the ritual would require sacrificing something deeply meaningful to me, but it wouldn't be something tangible. The entities I had called fed on pain and darkness, and the only way to repel them was by giving something of equal magnitude, my own essence. "You must prepare to give up part of yourself," said Grandmother Willow. "A fragment of your soul will remain forever in the shadow world. Only then will balance be restored and you'll be free of them." My hands trembled. Would I be capable of sacrificing part of myself to end the nightmare I provoked? That night the ritual was prepared. Grandmother Willow drew ancient symbols on the floor using ashes and animal blood, while arranging candles around a circle. The atmosphere became charged, almost suffocating, with dense, tangible energy. Maria watched me apprehensively, while Grandmother Willow asked me to enter the circle and kneel. The ritual began, and I soon felt crushing pressure in my chest, as if something was being torn from me. The air around became icy, and I saw the same shadows that pursued me at home. They were there, floating on the circle's periphery, watching with their empty eyes. An indescribable sensation took hold of me as I felt my soul fragmenting, being devoured by those dark entities. The pain was unbearable, as if invisible claws were tearing me apart from within. Each breath seemed a superhuman effort. I can't say how long it lasted, until the ritual reached its climax. One last blow of pain pierced my body, so intense I thought my heart would stop. And then suddenly, everything went silent. The cold left, the shadows disappeared, and warmth returned to fill the environment. I collapsed to the ground, exhausted. My body trembled, unable to move. However, for the first time in a long while, I no longer felt the weight of dark presences. Grandmother Willow approached, her eyes showing fatigue but also satisfaction, and helped me stand. "You succeeded. You gave enough of yourself to appease the entities. But remember, the price will never be completely paid. A part of you remained with them, and you'll feel their presence, though more subtle. Balance has been restored, but at a high cost." These words struck me like a blade of ice. I knew something essential in me was lost forever, something that would never be recovered. However, the shadows had retreated. They no longer pursued me with the same intensity. It was a small victory within a crushing defeat. Maria took me back to her house. That night on the way, silence dominated. I was exhausted, lost in thoughts I couldn't organize. Understanding, she respected my silence. She knew certain experiences couldn't be translated into words. As days passed, everything seemed calmer, though the emptiness continued accompanying me. At least there was no longer that oppressive feeling of being watched. My sleep, though light, was finally possible. But inside, something in me was irreparably different. I was no longer the same. A constant shadow remained like a scar that would never disappear. My family still worried about Kelsey, who remained hospitalized. However, subtle signs of improvement began emerging. She was no longer completely detached from the world, but remained weak and fragile. The first time I visited her after the ritual, I felt something between us had broken. The empty gaze she cast upon me didn't seem loaded with guilt, nor did it bring relief. It was as if she perceived something in me had changed, without understanding exactly what. As months dragged on, Kelsey slowly recovered part of her vitality, but it was evident she'd never be as before. There were deep sequels, physical and emotional, that no time could erase. Her old friends abandoned her when she needed them most, and her life lost the brightness and enthusiasm that once defined her. Kelsey was no longer the young woman full of light we knew. She was just a shadow of what she had been. As for me, despite my efforts, the tranquility I longed for never arrived. I kept the store running, but the satisfaction it once brought me faded. My choices had transformed me profoundly, not just spiritually, but in how I saw the world. The hatred and desire for revenge that drove me for so long now seemed frivolous and empty. In destroying Kelsey, I also destroyed part of myself. Gradually, I distanced myself from my family. Their mere presence was a reminder of what I had done, something they would never understand. I became increasingly involved in my work, or in the isolation of my house. The few friendships I maintained disappeared over time. No one knew exactly what motivated my distancing, but everyone supposed I carried something too heavy to share. Years passed, but the consequences of my actions never completely abandoned me. Although the dark entities had retreated, there was always a distant presence, an echo of negative energy around me. I knew I would never totally escape the weight of my choices. However, at least I prevented those shadows from completely swallowing me. One day, while walking through the busy streets of New Orleans, I spotted Kelsey. She moved slowly, leaning on a cane, but she was there, alive. It was a shock to see her so fragile, a distant image of the vibrant, energetic young woman I once knew. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and what I saw in hers was something unexpected, a mixture of melancholy and acceptance. There was no hatred, no accusations, just a silent understanding that, in different ways, we were both destroyed by everything that happened. She continued on her path while I remained motionless on the sidewalk, watching her steps until they disappeared into the distance. It was then I realized a painful truth. Even having obtained the revenge I sought with such fervor, the peace I imagined finding never came. Ruining Kelsey's life didn't bring me the relief or satisfaction I expected. On the contrary, it left me with a profound emptiness, an existence marked by suffering and shadows. I understood in that moment that the price of revenge is too high to be worthwhile. Even worse was realizing that despite having done everything to repair the damage, the marks of darkness I once invoked would remain with me like scars that could never be erased. Ever since I was a child, I remember whenever fear gripped me, my mother would repeat that the real danger in life didn't come from ghosts, but from the living who could truly harm us. Years later, in my early 20s, I inherited a sum of money after she passed from a heart attack. At the time, my parents had owned a cottage located in Montana, near Flathead Lake. However, due to financial strain, my father decided to put it on the market. The rental income didn't cover the mortgage anymore, and the cottage would be listed within weeks. With all the paperwork in progress, the place would remain empty without new tenants. I seized this opportunity as a chance to escape the chaos and clear my mind. I quit my job at the warehouse, packed my guitar gear, loaded my golden retriever bear into my mother's old sedan, and headed to the cottage. The first 3 days went by without incident. I spent time teaching Bear to catch frisbees in the deep snow, practiced guitar by the fireplace, and at night, I'd relax on the porch with coffee and cigarettes. I had everything I needed: groceries, supplies, and solitude. I only ventured out for walks with Bear nearby. Aside from that, books and acoustic sessions were my companions. I felt like I was finally beginning to shed the weight of recent months. The cottage had 2 floors. Downstairs were the living room, a guest room, and a kitchen. Upstairs featured 2 bedrooms and a screened porch attached to the main bedroom. My days were split between the living area, kitchen, and main bedroom. I rarely visited the other rooms, preferring to keep them closed off. On the 5th day, I decided to follow my usual routine. Since it was raining heavily, I stayed inside the cottage. That's when strange things began to happen. In the vicinity, there were only 2 other cottages within relative distance, about 300 yards from each other. The remaining properties were more than 2 miles away, surrounded by thick pine forests. Both nearby cottages were unoccupied, and there had been no signs of life in recent days. Around 2 in the afternoon, while throwing the frisbee for Bear outside, I noticed tracks in the mud around the cottage. The freshness of the impressions indicated they were recent, maybe an hour old. I thought it might be some hermit neighbor I hadn't encountered yet. The tracks led toward the denser part of the forest and disappeared among the trees. I chose to dismiss it and went back inside. When nightfall came, I decided to turn in. Bear was lying with me, but suddenly became alert. His ears perked up, and he leaped from the bed, racing downstairs to the living room. I stayed motionless, listening to his steps echo through the lower floor. After several minutes, he returned upstairs and began that typical canine ritual, indicating he needed to go out. Damn. Fine. I couldn't refuse. We went down together to the front door for him to do his business. But instead, he started tugging at the leash forcefully, trying to drag me somewhere. His eyes were fixed on the densest part of the forest where I'd seen the tracks earlier. But simultaneously, he was sniffing the side of the house and glancing up at the roof. When he realized I wouldn't follow, he sat and stared into the darkness. Strange, but perhaps it was just wildlife. Still, I wasn't willing to chase anything in that darkness. So I pulled him back inside, and we went upstairs again. About 45 minutes later, while in bed, there came footsteps on the roof. They sounded like hooves, about 8 paces evenly spaced. I tried to rationalize. Maybe a fallen branch or an animal running across. The problem was, the steps had a human rhythm. I felt chills. Bear also noticed and ran to the porch door, waiting for me to open it. Back then, I liked to think I was tough. I grabbed my jacket, pulled on my boots, took my cigarettes and a flashlight, and went out to the porch. I lit a cigarette, shone the beam around the roof, and found nothing. The surface was untouched. This only made everything stranger. Was I imagining things? But Bear had heard it too. Maybe he was picking up on my fear. Gradually, I began to relax. The darkness didn't seem so threatening anymore, and I returned to watching the stars and trees surrounding the cottage. That's when I saw something in the canopy of a tree slightly taller than the cottage, about 25 feet away. There it was. It looked like a man crouched between 2 branches, incredibly tall, perhaps 8 or 9 feet, and frighteningly thin. Its unnaturally long, pale arms were stretched upward, gripping a branch. Its mouth hung open without expression. What in God's name was that thing? It remained motionless, almost as if watching me. Bear started pacing behind me, emitting a low growl. I extinguished my cigarette. My instinct told me not to point the flashlight in that direction. So I slowly backed into the bedroom, pulling Bear with me. I locked the door of the porch. Carefully, I aimed the beam at the tree. Nothing there. I closed the blinds on the glass door and tried to return to bed, though my body remained tense. Later that night, I heard soft tapping on the glass door. It sounded like someone drumming with fingertips. It was continuous and lasted nearly 2 hours. Bear stared at the door but didn't approach. The most disturbing part was the strange sensation that something was calling me to open the door. Simultaneously, a voice echoed in my mind, my mother's voice telling me not to do it. I obeyed. I stayed where I was. Eventually, I fell asleep. When dawn broke, I wasted no time. I gathered my belongings quickly and left that place behind. Some experiences are meant to remain unexplained, and I had no intention of understanding what I'd seen that night. The cottage was sold 2 weeks later, and as far as I know, the new owners moved in without incident. Perhaps it had been my imagination after all. Or perhaps whatever watched from those trees only appeared to those who'd recently lost someone, drawn to grief like moths to a flame. I'll never truly know. I've carried this memory with me for years, a weight I can never quite set down. It happened in Pennsylvania, back in 1983 when I was 14. My grandfather, Samuel, had just passed away, a stoic farmer who'd lived a long, weathered life. He had a distinctive appearance that marked his stubborn vanity. Hair white as fresh snow, contrasting sharply with his meticulously dyed black mustache, a futile attempt to hold back time's relentless march. The funeral home was thick with sorrow, heavy with the cloying scent of wilting carnations and melted wax candles. Hymns echoed off wood-paneled walls as mourners shuffled past. When my turn came to say goodbye, I approached the sleek mahogany casket slowly, my polished shoes clicking against hardwood floors. I peered down at Grandfather Samuel's serene face, peaceful as someone in a deep slumber. But something unsettled me. His hands, those calloused, powerful hands that had plowed fields and held grandchildren, were concealed beneath white satin gloves. The singing around me became muffled, distant. Why would they hide his hands? Strange curiosity gnawed at me as I leaned closer, studying the unusual choice. I'd seen those hands countless times, gripping plow handles, kneading bread dough, brushing dirt from my scraped knees. An inexplicable urge seized me to lift the fabric and understand. My fingertips barely grazed the satin when I felt a firm grip on my wrist. Mother stood beside me, her expression mixing pleading with warning. No words were needed. Her eyes told me everything I needed to know. I shouldn't. Ashes to ashes, the pastor intoned, his voice booming in the small chapel. His words created a stark contrast to the tight knot in my stomach. I stepped back, heart hammering, Mother's touch still burning on my skin. What could be hidden beneath those gloves? Why wouldn't they let me see? I retreated among the other mourners, but unease followed like a shadow. People shared muted embraces and stifled tears, yet I felt disconnected from their shared grief. My thoughts remained trapped on that peculiar detail, Mother's surprising reaction. I decided to let it be for now, promising myself I'd ask later. Surely there was a reasonable explanation. Then, piercing the solemn atmosphere, an ear-splitting crack shattered the quiet. The casket plummeted from its supports, hitting the wooden floor with bone-jarring force. The chapel seemed to shake. A woman's scream cut through the stunned silence. We'd all frozen, holding our breath together. Funeral staff rushed forward, faces pale with shock. They'd positioned the casket minutes before. How could it have fallen? The oak supports were solid, checked multiple times. No one had been near it. Impossible, yet here we were. A cold dread crept up my spine as my eyes met Mother's. She stared at the fallen casket, transfixed, as if watching something we couldn't see. Nervous whispers spread, restless spirit, unfinished business, sign from beyond. After the initial shock, the men carefully repositioned the casket, triple-checking stability this time. The ceremony rushed to its conclusion. We buried Grandfather beside my grandmother Margaret in Meadowbrook Cemetery. Partners once again after 15 lonely years. Later that evening, back at the farmhouse preparing for the wake, the incident wouldn't leave my mind. Mother looked exhausted, her face ashen, carrying more than just grief. "Mom," I finally ventured as we arranged folding chairs, "why were Grandpa's hands covered?" She stopped mid-motion, hanging frozen with a dining chair in her grip. I'm not entirely sure," she whispered. "Or perhaps I know too well." We sat on grandmother's old sofa, its crocheted doily yellowed with age. Candlelight cast long shadows that danced like living things. Mother took a shaky breath. "Your grandfather," she began carefully, "was always a private man. Dignified, old-fashioned. Never showed much emotion. That was just how he was raised in Indiana during the Depression. But these past years, he changed." Withdrew further. "How do you mean?" "He'd spend hours alone in the barn, speaking less and less. When he did talk, it was often disconnected, rambling about things that made no sense. But his hands," she paused, gripping the sofa arm. "He was obsessed with them. Claimed they were diseased, transforming. Insisted no one should see or touch them. Said he was losing his fingers, one by one." A chill ran through me. This wasn't the strong farmer I'd known. He started wearing thick leather work gloves constantly, even on scorching summer days in the fields. When anyone asked, he'd change the subject or make excuses about the rough farm work. "But why, Mom? What was wrong with them?" She hesitated, then began the story I wasn't prepared to hear. "Years ago, when we were children, the oldest of us was 11, the youngest only 6, we lost our mother to influenza. Raising 4 kids alone broke something in your grandfather. He worked himself to the bone as the night watchman at Meadowbrook, the very cemetery where we buried him today." She continued, voice thick with old memories. "One October night during his rounds, he stopped at Mother's grave. Must have been fighting off despair, maybe even anger. He started speaking to her headstone, blaming her for leaving him with 4 children to raise alone. Then he heard a voice call his name. Not a man's voice, not a woman's, something in between. 'Samuel,' it said. He spun around, but saw nothing except fog rolling between tombstones. 'I'll ease your burden,' the voice promised, 'but in exchange, I'll need part of your ability to work.' Desperate and broken, not thinking clearly, he accepted. My blood ran cold. What happened then? His hands began to change immediately. Darkening, deforming. He thought it was diabetes at first. Doctors misdiagnosed gangrene. But it was more insidious than that. Mother's hands shook as she continued. Whenever one of us fell seriously ill, or he himself faced what should have been fatal accidents, we'd survive against all odds. Pneumonia that should have killed my little brother. Gone in days. Tractor accident that should have crushed his chest. Barely scratched. But each time, he lost more of his hands, she nodded slowly. Every miracle had its price. Each preservation of life cost him another piece of himself. His carpentry, which he loved deeply, became impossible. Couldn't grip his tools. Eventually, couldn't even tend the farm properly. Yet somehow, we always had enough. Food appeared. Bills got paid. Help arrived when needed. The puzzle pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. So when he called us home to his deathbed, I arrived first, as you know. Stayed to care for him. He was adamant that no one touch him, not even to help him dress or use the bathroom. Thought it was his pride at first. Then I saw, her voice cracked. His hands weren't hands anymore. More like hooves. His feet, too. Black as coal, deformed into something. Wrong, unnatural, like some terrible transformation had taken hold. The room seemed to grow colder. And whatever he made the pact with came to collect, she finished. That's why the casket fell. It wasn't an accident. Something was there, claiming what it was owed. Silence stretched between us, broken only by the old house settling and wind rattling windows. Everything I'd believed about my grandfather had shifted into something far more unsettling. "What now?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Mother squeezed my hand. "We pray for his soul, for peace. Even if the bargain was cruel, perhaps our prayers can help him now." That night, as we held the traditional wake with family and friends, I kept watching the darkness beyond the windows. And I wondered, if faced with such a choice, what would any of us do to protect those we love? Will we be strong enough to refuse? Or desperate enough to accept? The question haunts me still. There I was, scrolling through Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace, hunting for a new phone. This was back in March of 2019, probably searching for an iPhone 8 or something similar, still from that era when the home button was standard. I found a simple listing. iPhone for sale, brand new, around $300. At that price point, it was irresistible. The seller gave me all the details, factory unlocked, never used, box still sealed. He even sent a video to prove it. His name was Lucas, and through our message exchanges, he seemed like a friendly, easygoing guy to chat with. I got his number, and we arranged to meet. The listing showed he was pretty close to me, but through our texts, Lucas explained he'd only passed through the area that morning and was now about 2 hours west. This bothered me a bit, but the price was too good to pass up. I decided to ask my friends if anyone wanted to join me on this little mission. It was really a way to make the long drive more enjoyable. Amy volunteered, but on one condition. I had to take her out for dinner afterward. Lucas sent me the address of a police station, saying he only conducted business in police parking lots to avoid scams. I thought that was pretty smart, and it actually gave me more confidence about the deal. I picked up Amy around 7:30 on a Saturday evening, and we hit the road, her keeping me company in the car. Having her there made the journey much lighter and more fun. It was a Saturday night, and we were already planning to go out afterward if everything went well. However, as we approached our destination, I noticed the area was extremely isolated, with woods on both sides, a few scattered buildings here and there, and a silence that was almost uncomfortable. We arrived at the police station, but there was nobody around except for the empty police cars. I drove a few laps around the building, but no sign of Lucas, who said he'd be in a black Civic. I called him, and he explained that his car had broken down on the way, stuck on the side of the road. He asked if I could help jumpstart it with cables he already had in his car. Despite feeling uneasy, I agreed, after all. I'd driven 2 hours to get there and didn't want to go home empty-handed. Meanwhile, Amy was shooting disapproving looks my way, shaking her head, completely against the idea. Lucas ended the call with "See you soon." No way. This is too suspicious. Let's leave, Amy almost shouted, and I knew she was right. Even so, I said we'd just drive by the spot to see what was going on. Deep down, I also thought it was strange, but I was frustrated at having wasted so much time and energy for nothing. We drove to the location he sent. As we approached, we saw the reflection of headlights from a car, stopped on a dark road surrounded by thick forest. I slowed down to confirm it was indeed a black car, but I couldn't see anyone inside or outside. The darkness was almost complete, yet any movement would have been visible. "Keep driving," Amy commanded with a tone of urgency, and I didn't hesitate. It was the strangest and most suspicious scene I'd ever witnessed. A deserted road surrounded by dense forest, no lighting or other cars nearby. Everything about it seemed like the perfect setup for a trap. I kept going without looking back. As soon as I passed, my phone started ringing insistently. It was Luca's. I didn't answer any of the calls. Shortly after, I received a text. "I saw you drive by. Why didn't you stop? Come back here." I ignored that too. Amy, ever the optimist, laughed about the situation and remarked, "Okay, now you definitely owe me dinner." We looked for a nearby diner and stopped at a small, empty place, which was weird for a Saturday night. We ordered coffee, and while the waitress was taking our order, a man in a hoodie walked in and sat at the counter. He wore a dark navy hoodie, somewhat worn, and glanced briefly at us before staring at the counter and ordering coffee. But he kept looking in our direction from time to time. I leaned toward Amy and whispered, "Don't look now, but I think that guy might be Luca's." The waitress brought our coffees and asked if we wanted anything else. I replied hesitantly, "1 minute, please." When she delivered the coffee to the man at the counter, he thanked her. "Thank you, sweetie." At that moment, I recognized the voice. It was exactly the same as on the phone. I whispered to Amy, "It's him. We need to leave now." I called the waitress over and almost in a whisper asked, "Can we get the check?" She looked at me concerned and asked if there was a problem. I noticed Luca's watching us and replied, "No, we were just passing through." She brought the check quickly. We paid, down our coffees as fast as we could, and left. As soon as we got in the car, Amy looked at the diner and warned, "He's getting up." I looked and saw the man walking hurriedly toward the door. I didn't wait to see what he'd do. I floored it and left the parking lot. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a black car parked there that looked a lot like the one we'd seen earlier. I drove as fast as I could to reach the highway, trying to put distance between us. But after a few miles, the tire pressure warning light came on. My heart sank. Immediately, I knew he had punctured my tire. The pressure was dropping rapidly, and I had no choice but to pull over. I got out of the car and confirmed it. The tire had been slashed. Changing to the spare took about 20 minutes, and every second felt like an eternity. Eventually, we managed to get back on the road. And if you're wondering, yes, I still took Amy out to dinner that night. This has become a wild story that Amy and I tell while laughing. But it's scary to remember how close we came to falling into a trap. The whole thing still sends chills down my spine when I think about what could have happened if we'd actually gotten out of the car on that dark, isolated road. I met Sarah through a Tinder match back in September. We'd been talking for about 2 weeks when we decided to meet up for drinks in downtown Portland. She was 6 years older than me. She'd listed her age as 32, while I was only 26. That first date went well enough. We grabbed craft beer at a local brewery, talked about our jobs and favorite hiking trails. Nothing dramatic happened, but I enjoyed her company. When she invited me to meet her friends the following weekend, I agreed. Sarah's friend group was interesting. We met at a trendy cocktail bar in the Pearl District. They were all professionals, a lawyer, a marketing executive, and someone who worked in tech. They were polite, maybe a bit overly curious about my work as a graphic designer, but nothing raised any red flags. 2 weeks later, Sarah mentioned a reunion of sorts. Former colleagues from her first job out of college were getting together. She seemed nervous about going alone. "I'd really appreciate it if you came with me," she said over coffee one Sunday morning. "I made an effort to introduce you to my friends. It would mean a lot." The event was scheduled for a Saturday evening in late October. According to Sarah, it wasn't an official company reunion, just a get-together organized by one of her former coworkers who'd done well for himself and owned a nice place in the West Hills. I'd never been to something like this before, but I figured it would be fine. Maybe a bit awkward, meeting more of her past connections, but manageable. The house was impressive. A modern architectural design with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. When we arrived, the circular driveway was already crowded with cars, though I noticed they were all fairly modest vehicles. For such an upscale home, I'd expected more luxury cars. Inside, the space was just as impressive. High ceilings, contemporary art on the walls, and large windows that would have offered stunning views during daylight. But what struck me was the atmosphere. People were gathered in small groups, and when we entered, I felt every eye turned toward us. Sarah was immediately welcomed with embraces and air kisses. Several people approached me with questions. Where was I from? What did I do for work? How long had Sarah and I been seeing each other? There was something off about their interest, less friendly curiosity, more like an interview. "Let's mingle," Sarah said, gently pulling me toward another group. But everywhere we went, I felt scrutinized. And then I started noticing something else. These people all seemed older than they should be. "How old did you say your former colleagues were again?" I asked Sarah quietly. "We all started around the same time, so most are in their early 30s, she replied. But that didn't add up. Many of these people appeared to be in their late 30s or early 40s. Their skin, their mannerisms, even the way they carried themselves, suggested they were older than Sarah claimed. "Do you actually remember all these people from your old job?" I asked. "Of course," Sarah responded quickly. "It was only 8 years ago." I glanced around the room. The clothing styles were odd, formal, but somehow dated, like they were dressed for a business function in the early 2000s. No music played, which added to the strange atmosphere. "Have you seen the host yet?" I asked. "The guy who owns this place." Sarah scanned the room. "No, actually. I haven't seen Mike all night." After about 45 minutes, I couldn't shake the growing unease. "I need to use the restroom," I told Sarah, though honestly, I just needed a moment alone to collect my thoughts. I wandered through the house, noting its layout. People I passed in the hallways stared with unblinking intensity. Eventually, I found the guest bathroom. I locked the door, sat on the edge of the tub, and pulled out my phone. I texted my roommate, "This party is super weird. These people are creeping me out." Sarah must have noticed my absence because she texted, "Where are you? Everything okay in the bathroom?" "Be right out," I replied. Then added, "This party is really strange. Can we leave soon? Why?" "What's wrong?" she responded immediately. Before I could answer, there was a knock at the door. I quickly washed my hands and opened it. Standing outside was one of the younger-looking people from the party, though even he appeared older than mid-30s. He glanced around, then stepped closer and spoke in a low voice. "You should leave." "Now what?" "Why, that woman you're with, Sarah, or whatever she's calling herself, she's not who you think she is." I felt my stomach drop. "What are you talking about? How much did she tell you about this gathering?" "She said it was a reunion from her old job." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Look around. Do these people look like they just left college 8 years ago?" I stared at him, trying to process what he was implying. "I can't explain everything, but you need to trust me. Get out of here as fast as you can." He pushed past me into the bathroom and shut the door. I stood frozen for a moment, my mind racing. Everything about this evening had felt off from the beginning. The stares, the questions, the age discrepancies, the strange formality. His warning only confirmed my growing suspicions. I decided to trust my instincts. Instead of returning to find Sarah, I made my way to the exit. I tried to appear casual, but I could feel eyes following my every movement. When I finally reached the front door, I stepped outside and didn't look back. I drove straight home, my hands slightly shaking on the steering wheel. Once there, I debated whether to text Sarah or just ghost her. I chose the middle ground and sent a brief message. Had to leave suddenly. Something came up. She responded almost instantly. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm worried." I didn't reply. Instead, I did something I probably should have done earlier. I searched for her online. I started with the phone number she'd given me. When I reverse searched it, I got a different name entirely. Michelle Briggs. The address associated with the number was in a completely different neighborhood than where I'd picked her up both times we'd met. That realization hit me like a cold shower. Both times we'd gone out, she'd been waiting on the sidewalk when I arrived. I'd never actually been inside her apartment or even seen which building she lived in. The next day, I told my roommate and a couple of close friends what had happened. They admitted they'd found Sarah strange from the beginning, but hadn't wanted to say anything. "Dude, this sounds like something out of Get Out," my roommate joked, but his laugh was nervous. For the next week, Sarah continued to text me. Her messages grew more insistent, then accusatory, and finally pleading. I never responded and eventually blocked her number. Months later, I still wonder what I stumbled into that night. Was it some kind of cult? A group involved in something illegal? Or was there an even darker explanation? My friends and family all have their theories, but none of them quite fit. The truth is, I'll probably never know what was really going on in that house. But I'm grateful I trusted that stranger's warning and my own instincts. Sometimes the scariest stories are the ones where you never get the full explanation. You just escape with the knowledge that you avoided something terrible. I'll rewrite the story while maintaining the plot development, rhythm, and speaking style for an American audience. I'll also move it to a different time and place, change some details to make it more unpredictable, and make it slightly longer. This happened when I was 9 years old. We lived in a 2-story farmhouse on the outskirts of a small Texas town. My parents had me late in life, and my 2 older brothers were at least a dozen years older than me. That particular night in August was stifling hot, and we didn't have air conditioning back then. I was awakened around midnight by commotion coming from downstairs. It was my parents' voices, urgent and hushed. I opened my bedroom door and listened. Their tones were sharp and worried, but I couldn't make out the words. I crept to the top of the stairs and called out, "Mom." "Dad," my mother appeared at the foot of the stairs, her face pale in the dim light from the kitchen. "Go back to bed, Tommy. Everything's fine." I obeyed without question, but I knew something was wrong. They seemed anxious, maybe even scared. I tried to fall back asleep, but soon I heard our old pickup truck start and pull away from the house. Then there was complete silence, the kind of thick, heavy silence you only get in the country. About an hour later, I was jolted awake by sounds from downstairs. Footsteps creaked across the old wooden floors. The refrigerator door opened and closed. Cabinets were being searched through quietly. I figured it had to be my older brother Jim, who worked nights at the lumber mill and sometimes came home hungry. That's what I told myself as I lay there listening. Then I heard those footsteps on the stairs. They were slow, deliberate. They stopped right outside my door. The doorknob turned ever so slowly. My heart was pounding as I watched the door swing open. The hallway was pitch black. Whoever was there seemed comfortable moving in complete darkness. Just a shadow filled the doorway. I whispered, "Jim." "Mom, Dad, who's there?" Silence. The figure just stood there for what felt like forever. Then the door slowly closed, and the footsteps retreated down the hall. I was confused and a little frightened, but I convinced myself it was probably my father checking on me without wanting to fully wake me up. I heard the footsteps go back downstairs. For a while, there was no sound from below, but my curiosity got the better of me. I slipped out of bed and tiptoed downstairs in my bare feet. The house felt different, wrong somehow. When I reached the kitchen, there was a tall figure standing motionless in the corner by the back door. The moonlight through the window showed just the outline of someone very tall. "Dad?" I asked hesitantly. A deep voice responded, "Go back upstairs." Without thinking, I turned and ran. I took the stairs 2 at a time, slammed my bedroom door, and dove under the covers. My heart was racing, and something in the back of my mind kept telling me that didn't sound quite like my father. But at 9 years old, I didn't want to believe anyone else could be in our house. Maybe another hour passed. I heard the front door open and familiar voices downstairs. I went to the landing and listened. This time it was definitely my parents. "Why are you up, Tommy?" my mother asked, surprised to see me. "What happened? Where did you go?" They exchanged worried glances. "Jim had an accident at the mill, but he's okay now. Just a few stitches." It wasn't until breakfast the next morning that I asked my father if he'd come to my room during the night. He stopped eating mid-bite and looked at my mother. "We were at the hospital all night, son," We didn't get back until just before 3 in the morning. That's when I told them about the person in my room and in the kitchen. My mother's face went white. My father grabbed his old hunting rifle from the closet and searched every room, every closet, even the attic and basement. My mother called the sheriff while I sat at the kitchen table, trying to make sense of it all. Sheriff Williams arrived with a deputy. They asked me to describe everything I'd seen and heard. My parents were devastated that they'd left in such a hurry, worried about Jim, that they'd forgotten to lock the back door. We'd never even had a key to the front door. Country living was different back then. Nothing was missing from the house. Maybe the intruder didn't mean me any harm. But that thought didn't make it less terrifying. For months afterward, I slept with my parents' old baseball bat under my bed, and they installed new locks on every door and window. That summer night in Texas still haunts me. The memory of that tall shadow in my doorway, and that deep voice telling me to go back upstairs. I never did find out who it was or what they wanted, but the thought of a stranger wandering through our home while I slept, and even speaking to me, that's something that stays with you forever. The sheriff said it might have been a drifter looking for an empty house to rob, or maybe someone my brothers knew from their wild younger days. We never got any answers. All I know is that for a 9-year-old boy, it was the most terrifying night of my life. My name is Vincent Garcia, and what I'm about to recount is something that for years I questioned getting involved in without realizing it. Today I understand that the mysterious doesn't announce itself when it decides to enter our lives. My journey begins several years ago when I was merely an inexperienced young man, starting my career in a small agricultural community near Modesto, California. During that period, my family faced serious financial hardships. My father, Pedro, worked the fields, but harvests had been cruel for far too long. I attempted to continue my education, but circumstances forced me to seek employment to help support our household. It was my father who, one summer afternoon, brought a potential solution. He mentioned an old acquaintance, Don Vicent, who ran a small distribution center in the region and needed assistance in the warehouse. For him, it was an opportunity to learn something new while earning money. Don Vicent was a man with an amiable temperament, but very determined. From our first meeting, he showed respect, something rare from employers. His enterprise, though modest, was expanding, and I considered myself fortunate to be part of it. The initial days were demanding. Organizing and loading merchandise required strength, but I was genuinely grateful for the stability the job provided. As time passed, I began to know his family better. Dona Acacia, his wife, was always welcoming and kind. When she visited the warehouse, she'd bring food for her husband and share some with the employees. Their children, Saulo and Gabi, also appeared occasionally. Saulo, still young, was filled with curiosity and easily distracted by anything around him. Gabi, the older one, was completely different, withdrawn, avoiding conversation, never looking directly at anyone and making sure to leave quickly. At that moment, I interpreted her behavior as shyness and didn't think much of it. Over the months, my connection with Don Vicent grew stronger. He recognized my dedication and offered advice on seizing opportunities that presented themselves. However, with time, I began to notice something unusual. Gabby started appearing at the warehouse more frequently. Despite remaining reserved, her presence became more regular. There was something peculiar about her behavior, but I didn't pay it much attention. To me, she remained just the boss's daughter. Things shifted when Don Vicent decided to promote me. He offered me the chance to learn to drive the company's trucks and eventually take over as a driver. With his help, I obtained my commercial license and soon began making deliveries. This not only increased my salary, but also allowed me to meet clients and better understand the business operations. I felt pride in my progress and the achievements I was attaining. It was in this new role that Gabby began approaching me differently. Initially, it seemed trivial, asking for help with boxes or wanting clarification about documents. Nevertheless, I sensed there was something more. Her glances lingered longer than usual, and her comments, though subtle, seemed to carry meaning I couldn't fully grasp. Despite this, I chose to disregard it, believing I might be misinterpreting the situation. My life outside work followed a peaceful course. I had begun dating Sarah, a young woman from my town, a childhood friend, and together we were planning our future. For the first time, I felt everything was falling into place. However, this harmony wouldn't last. Gabby started becoming more persistent. Her presence in the warehouse was nearly constant, and she always found reasons to be nearby. I felt confused about how to react. She was my employer's daughter, and any misstep could jeopardize everything I had achieved. I did my best to maintain distance, but she seemed determined to cross any boundary. Then the dreams began. Initially, they were only disconnected, meaningless images, but gradually they gained clarity and intensity. Gabby appeared in all of them with a vividness that would wake me breathless and heart-pounding. My mind, once entirely focused on work and Sarah, now seemed to revolve around something I couldn't understand or control. As the dreams became more frequent, my discomfort at work intensified. Gabby seemed to occupy not just my nights, but also my days. Her stares were direct, her words loaded with intentions, and I didn't know how to handle it. I tried talking to her, explaining that I couldn't reciprocate her feelings, but she would disregard me, unable to accept rejection. One afternoon, after exhausting hours in the warehouse, Gabby appeared in my office with some paperwork. There was something different about her posture, more assertive, more bold. Before I could react, she kissed me. I remained motionless. Afterward, she confessed she had been infatuated with me since her teenage years and would do whatever necessary for us to be together. I couldn't comprehend the depth of these words in that moment, but that kiss marked the beginning of something that would change my life forever. Following that incident, my mind transformed into a whirlwind of confused emotions. I understood that everything was inappropriate. Gabby was my supervisor's daughter, and I had a commitment to Sarah. Still, something within me felt altered, as if an inexplicable power had begun interfering with my thoughts and feelings. I continued trying to live normally, acting as if nothing had occurred. At work, I attempted to avoid Gabby and focus on my responsibilities, but she didn't make it simple. Her visits multiplied, as did her boldness. Any excuse was adequate to appear, an inventory issue, a document to review. each encounter left me more disoriented. There was something in her gaze, an intensity that appeared capable of manipulating my emotions. The nights, meanwhile, grew even more disturbing. In dreams, Gabai was no longer the timid young woman I'd first met. She became confident, nearly supernatural, and I would wake burdened by a combination of yearning and remorse that tortured me. My relationship with Sarah began experiencing the aftermath. Though she didn't understand precisely what was occurring, she sensed I wasn't the same. She would ask if I was all right, and all I could manage was deflection, because I couldn't explain what I was experiencing. One particular evening, my mother phoned with troubling information. My grandmother, Dona Vilma, had experienced an unusual vision involving me. In this vision, she saw me surrounded by shadowy chains that tightened progressively. Her description gave me chills, and though I attempted to dismiss it, it resonated within me. I made plans to visit her the following day to gain clarity. Dona Vilma was recognized for her wisdom in the area. Her understanding of folk remedies and her spiritual connection made her a respected figure. When I arrived at her home, she regarded me with concerned eyes and stated something ominous was surrounding me. She told me harmful energies were influencing me and that I needed protection. Without much explanation from me, she appeared to grasp more than I could articulate. She conducted a spiritual cleansing, burning herbs while reciting prayers quietly. Throughout the ceremony, I experienced brief respite, but I recognized it wouldn't be permanent. Upon returning home, everything seemed to deteriorate. The visions involving Gabai intensified, and my intrusive thoughts about her escalated. At work, the atmosphere grew unbearable. Gabai exhibited controlling behavior, insisting on knowing my location and conversation partners. If I failed to respond to her contacts, her reaction was pure anger. Frequently, she would wait outside after work, watching my movements and attempting to keep me away from Sarah. Bit by bit, I recognized her growing influence over my existence. My well-being started showing signs of strain. Panic episodes grew routine. I remained perpetually exhausted, mentally scattered. Work mistakes were common, and this didn't escape my colleagues' notice. They sensed my transformation, but avoided inquiring. Even Don Vicent displayed worry. Eventually, he summoned me to his office for discussion. I attempted to assure him I was fine, but he appeared unconvinced. He hinted I might need rest and provided several days' leave. Nonetheless, I realized the true issue wasn't physical, but something deeper and inexplicable. During this time, my visions took an even darker direction. One night, I witnessed Gabai encircled by dark candles and recognizable items, as if conducting a ceremony. She whispered incomprehensible phrases, but the scene felt so authentic that I woke with my heart racing and a heaviness in my chest that seemed tangible. Overcome with anxiety, I returned to my grandmother's residence the next day to describe the dream. Her face hardened instantly. She remarked that it wasn't simply dreams or happenstance. According to her, someone had performed spiritual manipulation to bind me. This filled me with uncertainty and unease. I'd always maintained skepticism regarding mystical matters, but recent experiences made me reconsider. My grandmother proposed I seek out Alfonso, a healer renowned for managing hexes and reversing spiritual manipulations. I wavered, torn between doubt and urgency. However, I understood I needed clarity. At Alfonso's residence, an elderly gentleman with penetrating eyes and a steady voice requested I document whatever came to mind on paper. With shaking hands, I wrote words: nightmares, distress, apprehension, and ultimately, Gabai. Upon reading, he shut his eyes, murmuring softly. Following a pause, he disclosed he envisioned a young lady who had performed spiritual manipulation to dominate me. He detailed how Gabai had employed my personal items to forge a connection that bound me to her. His account unnerved me. Despite my doubts about these traditions, I couldn't dismiss how his observations reflected my circumstances. He clarified the ceremony Gabai had performed as a love binding, a technique recognized for producing powerful emotional connections, but also bringing severe repercussions for everyone concerned. He volunteered to undo the spell, but cautioned me that the experience would be challenging and emotionally taxing. That night, I returned home overwhelmed by apprehension and uncertainty. How had matters reached this extreme? Though still hesitant, I couldn't deny the effect of the recent occurrences. I chose to heed his guidance and returned the next day to begin the ceremony that, he claimed, would sever the spiritual bond. When I appeared, everything was arranged. An altar lay prepared, adorned with ritual candles, plants, and markings I didn't understand. He instructed me to sit across from him, attempting to clear my consciousness as completely as I could. As he initiated the ceremony, an unusual feeling spread across my being, as though something unseen fought against release. The ceremony continued for several hours. Alfonso burned plants while chanting invocations almost inaudibly. I felt power surge through me like electricity, shifting between periods of bewilderment and moments of lucidity. Visions of Gabai emerged uncontrollably, her expression wavering between tenderness and fury. Once the ceremony concluded, I was thoroughly drained. Yet simultaneously, I sensed as though an immense load had been removed from me. That evening, for the initial time in several months, I slept uninterrupted. The visions that pursued me vanished, and I rose with a relief and mental sharpness I hadn't experienced in ages. Nevertheless, I understood everything hadn't been fixed. Alfonso had cautioned me that dissolving a binding carried implications for the caster too. The powers unleashed could upset both parties, and this concerned me regarding what might occur with Gabai. I resolved to face her. I needed to conclude this matter and find explanations. Finding her at the office, I sensed something altered. The assertive and controlling expression that had always defined her was replaced by bewilderment and dread. When I brought up the binding, she attempted denial. She claimed ignorance about my accusations, but her tone faltered and she refused to face me. Following my persistence, she ultimately confessed. She claimed it was done out of affection, unable to bear the notion of losing me to someone else. Her statements combined acknowledgement and accusation. She blamed me for overlooking her emotions earlier and failing to view her differently. I tried to convey that for me, there was never room for anything except courtesy and friendliness. But it appeared she refused to grasp this. At that instant, I recognized Gabai wasn't just experiencing an obsession with me, but something more profound and concerning. In the ensuing days, the consequences of the binding became increasingly apparent. Her conduct turned erratic, and coworkers started recognizing the transformations. Remarks about her muttering to herself or staring absently became increasingly common. Even Don Vicent, who had consistently defended her, grew worried. He summoned me to his office, inquiring if I knew what was occurring. How could I disclose that his child had turned to sorcery to attempt to ensnare me? During this period, Sarah and I were attempting to mend what was left of our connection. I shared with her a portion of events, omitting certain elements that might cause her additional hurt. Notwithstanding the challenge, she offered her assistance, and we jointly started healing from the ordeal. Nonetheless, the injuries from recent events remained. Though the binding was severed, the psychological wounds stayed, and the recollections of what occurred persistently troubled me. One evening, well past midnight, I got a phone call from Don Vicent. His tone was strained and full of worry. He mentioned that Gabby had experienced an outburst at home, damaging many items in her bedroom. He also stated he had discovered unusual things: burnt candles, pictures of myself, and drawings on the walls. He requested I come to his residence the next day. Upon my arrival, I faced a chaotic scene. The walls of Gabby's bedroom were filled with mysterious writings, and the room felt heavy and stifling. Don Acacia was weeping softly as Don Vicent attempted to manage the crisis. He led me to the bedroom, and I was astonished by what I saw. There was a makeshift shrine filled with my belongings. Many items I hadn't realized had vanished. A timepiece, strands of my hair, a shirt I identified as mine. The scene verified Alfonso's claims. Gabby had conducted a binding so intense that its dissolution had started affecting her adversely. I clarified to Don Vicent my understanding of the situation. I was aware he'd struggle to accept this explanation. He preferred to attribute it to mental health issues and chose to pursue medical help. Though I understood the issue transcended the medical realm, I couldn't elaborate without seeming delusional. Gabby was admitted to a facility in Bakersfield, where doctors attempted to identify her state. Later, Don Vicent informed me physicians believed she had a combination of mental illness and episodes of psychosis. However, the medical interventions seemed ineffective. Her conduct grew more volatile. Extended quiet phases alternated with angry eruptions that frightened those nearby. Given this, I felt conflicted between relief and remorse. I was liberated from something that had consumed my existence, yet I felt sorrow for Gabby's suffering. Don Vicent kept seeking logical reasons, without grasping that his daughter's ordeal went beyond medical understanding. In the meantime, I worked to reconstruct my existence. Sarah, although understanding and supportive, kept some emotional reserve. An invisible rift existed between us. That time seemed unable to heal. I worried our connection might never recover. At work, the environment was also strained. Even though no one addressed it openly, whispers circulated about Gabby, and the stares filled with wonder or disapproval were hard to overlook. Over the following weeks, updates about Gabby grew more alarming. One evening, Don Vicent phoned to report that Gabby had attempted to leave the facility under care. Staff found her wandering the halls during early hours, persistently repeating my name. His tone carried an unfamiliar blend of regret and helplessness. Weeks afterward, I called on my grandmother Dona Vilma for solace. She greeted me with characteristic composure, but showed worry in her expression. I updated her on current events, leaving out some specifics to spare her concern. After I completed my account, she remained quiet briefly before sharing something that would stay with me. The powers she awakened don't fade readily, my son. Though the binding has ended, the aftermath persists. This isn't finished. Her warning troubled me deeply. In the subsequent days, despite the vision stopping, I started observing indicators that something odd continued to affect me. Minor occurrences happened, items falling inexplicably, electricity flickering unexpectedly, and a persistent feeling of being monitored. I attempted to dismiss these incidents, but it was hard to overlook that matters were amiss. One evening, as I worked alone in the office updating papers, Don Vicent burst in unexpectedly. He looked drained and haggard. He mentioned needing to speak privately with me. Following the door closure, he produced a letter from his jacket that he'd discovered among Gabai's belongings. His throat caught as he detailed the letter's contents. The message, composed by Gabai, admitted to her deeds, the ceremonies, the ritual candles, and her attempts to influence me since her youth. The part that struck me deepest was the ending. If I can't possess you, I'd sooner vanish. But don't fret, for I'll remain with you in any way possible. A shiver went through me. Though Don Vicent didn't appear to grasp the magnitude of her threat, I understood it as a definite warning. Gabai wasn't prepared to surrender and appeared willing to go to unimaginable extremes. Later that evening, I received another call from the treatment center. Gabai had experienced another severe mental break and required transfer to enhanced security. The physician described how she shouted my name constantly during the incident, claiming I had deserted her and warning that retribution would follow. I couldn't rest that evening, consumed by troubling ideas. The cautions about lingering influences returned to me, making me wonder what Gabai might attempt even while confined. In the days after, I immersed myself in employment, hoping to distract my thoughts and prevent dwelling on recent events. Yet I quickly understood events were spiraling out of hand. One evening while heading home, an unexpected incident occurred. A vehicle appeared suddenly, causing me to veer sharply and collide with a tree. Though I survived the crash without harm, the feeling that it wasn't mere chance troubled me deeply. Something, perhaps someone, seemed intent on causing me injury. I sought Alfonso's advice once more. Hearing about the incident, he proposed that Gabai, unconsciously, might be directing harmful energy toward me. He detailed that influential mystical practices can produce unpredictable outcomes regardless of the user's wishes. He suggested conducting a defensive ceremony to repel any negative impact that could reach me. The same evening, we started the procedure. Alfonso created a protective barrier around me using ritual candles, plants, and blessed water. As the process progressed, I experienced an overwhelming presence encircling me, almost like an invisible shield forming. Upon completion, he confirmed I would feel more safeguarded, but stressed I should stay watchful for threats. Following days brought temporary ease. My consciousness felt lighter, and the weird incidents stopped briefly. Yet instinct suggested this wasn't adequate. My grandmother's warning kept playing in my head. This hasn't concluded. I made efforts to get back to my usual activities, prioritizing employment and my connection with Sarah. But my interactions with Don Vicent deteriorated. Despite never discussing it openly, his unease in my vicinity was clear. Recent incidents had wounded our relationship deeply. Meanwhile, Gabai's missing presence from the business grew more obvious. Fellow employees whispered about it, yet speaking her name became essentially forbidden. Later that week, while at my residence, Sarah unexpectedly called. Her tone showed alarm. She described having an unsettling vision about me. I was stuck in a shadowy chamber, encircled by entities attempting to seize me. Despite her usual skepticism toward these matters, she was compelled to mention it. Hearing this made my pulse quicken. While I stayed silent, I recognized the vision carried importance. During the night, an extraordinary event occurred. I jolted awake, feeling someone nearby. Looking around, everything seemed orderly, yet the room felt heavy and charged. Acting on Alfonso's guidance, I lit a ritual candle to ward off negative influences. The light wavered, while I detected a faint murmur close to my ear, speaking my name. Terror paralyzed me, but I quietly invoked prayers until drifting back to sleep. Morning arrived, and I chose to see my grandmother, describing what had occurred. She paid close attention and advised me to brace for whatever came ahead. Though the defensive ceremony had been beneficial, connections persisted that weren't fully broken. She recommended having a priest sanctify my residence for stronger safeguarding. Though not devout, I decided to accept her recommendation. Several days passed before the priest arrived to sanctify my home. While he recited blessings, a subtle serenity filled me, something absent for long periods. Yet this calmness swiftly faded when that evening, Don Vicent contacted me in distress. Gabai had experienced another breakdown in the hospital and harmed herself while uttering my name repeatedly. Her state deteriorated, and Don Vicent's psychological state wasn't improving. I experienced conflict recognizing I bore no blame for Gabai's decisions, yet struggling against remorse. Again, I visited Alfonso. Listening to my account, he looked at me gravely and declared it was time for a challenging choice. He revealed a method to sever all connections with Gabai entirely. Yet this demanded an exceptionally strong and dangerous procedure that could cause severe psychological strain, though it might succeed. One evening was consumed by deep consideration about his suggestion. I understood there were few alternatives. Moving forward was crucial for both myself and Gabai. The influences she'd summoned were ruining our existence. The following day, I returned to Alfonso and agreed to the ceremony. He gave me materials needed: black candles, particular plants, and a personal item from Gabai. Via Don Vicent's assistance, I obtained a bracelet she frequently wore. He didn't grasp my intention completely, but provided enough confidence to avoid pressing questions. We traveled to an isolated spot in the countryside for the procedure. Alfonso created the ceremonial space methodically and instructed me to stay in a sacred circle while he conducted the invocations. The atmosphere felt oppressive. I detected an overwhelming presence, as though forces opposed the disruption. While the ceremony advanced, severe aching overwhelmed my body, as if something was being torn from me. Alfonso warned against departing the circle in any circumstance. I kept my eyes shut, hoping for resolution. Following an endless period, the procedure finished. An overwhelming feeling of unburdening washed across me, as though an extraordinary mass had been lifted. Alfonso, clearly drained, assured me the connection had severed, though he maintained that the unleashed influences might still leave traces. After returning home, I experienced unmatched relief. It felt like shadows had lifted after countless months. Yet Alfonso's caution stayed in my mind. These after-effects persist beyond mere moments. Be ready for possible consequences. The following days, normalcy slowly resumed. The disturbing visions stopped, and ongoing unease lessened. Sarah saw the changes. While scars required healing, we were prepared to restore our partnership. In the workplace, Don Vicent skirted mentioning Gabai's name even though it was clearly difficult. We attempted maintaining workplace decorum, yet this pause didn't last. One evening during our meal, Don Vicent called in distress. Gabai had left the treatment facility. Medical staff indicated she'd fled overnight, undetected. Law enforcement was pursuing her, though Don Vicent implicitly believed she'd target me. He avoided direct statements, yet his implications were obvious. This update sparked fresh anxieties. Despite the severed spiritual link, I detected Gabai presented a threat. A day elapsed until an anonymous message arrived. It contained a photo of Gabai in a stark setting with a single statement. This remains unfinished. Our connection is forever. I stood frozen. I promptly contacted Alfonso. Listening attentively, he stated the influences from the procedure might continue affecting events. He emphasized staying strong against allowing terror to dominate again. Following him, Gabai remained spiritually unbalanced, creating danger for all involved. The weeks ahead carried stress. Each phone call threatened new danger. I installed surveillance equipment and replaced all entry locks. Yet this failed to ease my dread. Sarah, while attempting to show courage, showed emotional strain. I comprehended the circumstance overwhelmed normal people. Subsequently, authorities contacted me. Gabai was discovered in a derelict structure on the community's outskirts. She appeared weakened both physically and psychologically, encircled by tea lights and markings filling the interior. Medical response rushed her to the hospital for assessment. Hearing this created mixed emotions, liberation, combined with sorrow. Though aware of being released from her control, sympathy remained. Later, Don Vicent rang to state Gabai had relocated to a psychiatric institution in the capital. He insisted I never approach her again. His statement wounded deeply. He appeared to hold me accountable, though I endured comparable suffering. Gradually, I focused on mending my daily existence with Sarah and employment. Order eventually emerged, yet whenever Gabai's name arose or memories returned, unease crawled across my skin. Immediate threats appeared resolved, but emotional wounds stayed. After several months, Don Vicent reached out saying Gabai received care and demonstrated improvement. However, physicians offered no certainty regarding full recovery. In brief, lucid moments, she requested seeing me, though I refused these appeals. I understood interaction would only deepen unhealed injuries. Eventually, daily existence found balance despite lasting effects. Sarah and I worked to restore our bond, discovering peace in ordinary, calm instances. Deep inside, though, incompleteness never fully disappeared. Updates regarding Gabai became scarce. Don Vicent refrained from discussing her, apparently choosing to remove traces of familial ties professionally. In our final talk, he shared Gabai remained in mental care without healing prospects. She's essentially disconnected from reality, he mentioned with a defeated tone that affected me intensely. Afterward, I felt compelled to visit Alfonso again. I sought meaning in my experiences or understanding, if overlooking early warnings caused everything. He welcomed me calmly, and having listened, offered concluding insight. Dark influences often emerge via vulnerable individuals. Fault isn't the issue, growth is. You now understand forces surrounding you, and this awareness becomes true power. Those thoughts brought understanding. I realized Gabai's story wasn't isolated, but instructed me on honoring mysteries beyond comprehension. Despite heavy costs for all involved, I discovered purpose within confusion. Yet calmness was fleeting. One typical evening at home, dread unexpectedly engulfed me again. Something or somebody seemed to observe from afar, selecting their moment. Though I attempted dismissing the sensation, stepping into my yard presented an alarming sight. A black candle glowing beside a picture of myself. I remained unmoving. Entry to the area seemed impossible unobserved. Security cameras showed nothing unusual. Yet this clearly wasn't accidental. That evening, I found comfort at my grandmother's home. Describing what happened, she became solemn and stern despite breaking Gabai's connection. The forces she triggered remained loose. It wasn't her personally, but awakened influences seeking attachment. I needed resilience to resist their domination. From then on, peculiar occurrences grew stronger. Household items would vanish, later surfacing unexpectedly. Electrical systems malfunctioned regularly, and heaviness filled the space. Sarah, attempting comprehension, grew uneasy in my residence. Though unspoken, her fear for safety was obvious. Ultimately, I chose to conduct a conclusive ceremony, with Alfonso and my grandmother present. This aimed not solely to enhance defense, but close lingering openings after the severed connection. The extended function was demanding. While incense smoldered and chanting filled the space, overwhelming constriction crushed my torso, as though inner resistance fought against release. Upon conclusion, my grandmother tearfully assured me this would end it, but warned to always remain vigilant. These powers recede rather than vanish. This procedure marked significant progress. The overwhelming sense of dark surveillance gradually vanished. Within weeks, my residence recovered its lost tranquility. Sarah also sensed improvement. Though traces of hesitation remained, she grew relaxed around me. Yet psychological and spiritual impacts lingered. Gabai stayed committed, with occasional updates from Don Vicent. He avoided details, but shared when she still uttered my name, though less commonly now. I remained removed from everything concerning her, recognizing any interaction might reopen scars still healing. Sarah and I opted to relocate to fresh surroundings and begin anew, trying to abandon not solely distressing recollections, but the actual setting where it originated. I made a concluding stop to see my grandmother. She welcomed me with familiar affection and thoughtful observation. She valued my courage in confronting what others would deny, and emphasized protecting one's essence while pursuing harmony. During my departure, she presented an amulet crafted personally, assuring it would guard my future residence. I welcomed the offering with sincere appreciation, understanding her care would accompany me wherever I ventured. Relocating proved challenging yet crucial. We found a simple home in Phoenix, Arizona, where reconstruction started. Early months brought obstacles, but gradually achieved stability. I secured work at a trucking company, while Sarah resumed education. At last, we breathed easily without historical burdens. Even then, some evenings brought inexplicable restlessness, occasionally dreaming of Gabi, though her presence dimmed and dispersed progressively, as if disappearing gradually. These occasions reminded me of grandmother's wisdom influences, quiet rather than erase themselves. I accepted history would always affect me, though I developed strength to endure its teachings more easily. 1 year following relocation, Dom Vicent unexpectedly contacted me. His demeanor was more composed than previously. He mentioned Gabi's notable advancement and physicians' belief she was achieving tranquility. He omitted specifics, yet brought surprising comfort. Apparently her recovery process had commenced too. That conversation signified the conclusion of an arduous period in my existence. Though painful and challenging, it provided knowledge regarding perseverance, affection, and safeguarding ourselves against the unexplained. I trust my ordeal might encourage handling mystical encounters carefully. Although history stays present, I recognize emerging more capable from confronting my terrors with this capacity. I advance, developing significance and cherished experiences. Everything began when I rented a modest apartment in the heart of Hartford, Connecticut. It was an old building with weathered brick walls and windows that creaked in the wind, some even missing their glass panes entirely. Despite its somewhat foreboding appearance, it seemed like the right place for a fresh start after my divorce. I needed distance from the chaos of New York City and the painful memories that followed me there. It wasn't the ideal place, but with my limited funds and the low rent, it was my only option. On the first night, what I expected to be peaceful turned out to be unsettling. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a strange noise. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, but as I listened more carefully, I realized it was a muffled sound like whispers coming from outside, perhaps from the street or the courtyard. Half curious, half apprehensive, I got up to check. I looked out the window but saw nothing. I convinced myself it was just the wind playing tricks on my imagination and returned to bed. However, sleep didn't come easily. I remained with the uncomfortable feeling that something wasn't right in that place. With the dawn, everything seemed more ordinary and less threatening. I met some neighbors, which brought a little comfort. One of the first people I encountered was Mrs. Florence, an elderly woman who spent her time sweeping the hallway. Her face was kind, but her eyes avoided mine as if she was keeping some secret. I also met Marcus, a young man who worked the night shift at a nearby factory. Both seemed friendly, though something in Mrs. Florence's behavior intrigued me. She seemed to carry knowledge she didn't want to share. During our conversation, Marcus commented a bit about the building. He said that over the years, it had been a shelter for many people who, like me, were seeking a new beginning. However, he mentioned, almost as if it were something commonplace, that the building seemed to have a personality of its own. His tone of voice left me with the impression that there was more to that story than he was willing to say. That night the murmurs returned. This time they were clearer and seemed to come from inside my room. A chill ran through my body. I turned on the light and examined every corner but found nothing. Still, the feeling that something or someone was watching me was so intense that I ended up sleeping with the lights on. The following days were filled with attempts to adapt to my new routine and environment. Even so, I couldn't forget the strange experience. I told myself it was just imagination, a result of stress and recent changes in my life. One afternoon, when returning home, I ran into Mrs. Florence again in the hallway, faithful to her broom. This time she approached me and in an almost inaudible tone said, "Be careful with the other tenant in the building." Before I could ask anything, she turned and disappeared into her apartment, closing the door quickly. Her words echoed in my mind, bringing a new dose of unease and mystery. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just an elderly person's superstition. However, the weight in her voice and the seriousness in her eyes made me question that assumption. That night became even more difficult to sleep. The shadows projected on the walls seemed to move subtly, while the creaks and groans of the old building became almost unbearable. The serenity I was seeking had transformed into a constant sensation of surveillance, as if something was waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Thus, the days that promised peace gave way to nights marked by apprehension and fear. The idea of a peaceful home quickly disappeared, replaced by the unsettling perception that something dark lurked in the shadows, waiting for its moment. Mrs. Florence's warning only intensified this feeling. The whispers became more frequent, and the sounds in the silence of the night became even more disturbing. They were no longer just murmurs. Now there were dry knocks and creaks that reverberated through the walls. One particularly sleepless night, I was awakened by deafening sounds coming from the neighboring building. Banging and distressing screams, so intense they made me think the worst. Something inside me said I couldn't ignore it. I sought out Marcus in the hallway, knowing he was off work that day. When I told him about the noises, he confirmed he had heard them too. We decided to investigate together. We went down the stairs and crossed the corridor that connected our building to the adjacent one. The darkness of the path, illuminated only by some flickering bulbs, increased our tension. The screams continued, mixed with the banging, coming from deep within that old, abandoned building. As Marcus had mentioned, it was a place neglected for ages, without tenants or renovations, which only fueled the mystery. After walking through the corridors and looking through windows and doors of empty apartments, we came upon an ajar door. The interior was silent, a terrifying contrast to the noise we had heard before. We entered carefully, using our phones' flashlights to illuminate the environment. The apartment was in total disarray, with overturned furniture and scattered objects. Everything felt wrong, and a weight in my stomach began to overwhelm me. However, I felt I needed to continue. Something told me someone might need help. We began exploring the rooms. In the living room, a large bookshelf caught our attention, filled with old books deteriorated by moisture and strange objects. In one corner, there were black and white photographs with scratched-out eyes, similar to those we had seen in our building. When searching through the floor clutter, an open notebook stood out. I picked it up, and as I flipped through it, I noticed it contained macabre notes about rituals and sacrifices performed not only there, but also in other buildings. The texts, written in a crude manner with confusing scribbles, suggested they belonged to someone with a deeply disturbed mind. Suddenly, a sharp murmur arose behind us, making us turn instantly. There was no one there, but the environment had become drastically colder. Marcus and I exchanged glances, aware we shouldn't remain there much longer. Even so, something in us pushed us to continue, driven by a mix of fear and almost irresistible curiosity. In the last room, we found what seemed to be the source of the screams. The floor displayed deep marks, as if something or someone had been dragged across it. On the walls, symbols and grotesque drawings were scattered, made with what appeared to be blood and clay. In the center of the room, a small altar caught our attention. It held a disturbing carved figure of Santa Muerte. The environment was suffocating, heavy, as if something invisible was watching us. Marcus began to mumble prayers, but his voice was almost inaudible, swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere of the place. My body reacted to that energy in a visceral way. I knew we needed to get out of there immediately. Before we could move, a sudden gust of cold wind extinguished the candles on the altar, leaving us in total darkness. Then a piercing, deafening scream echoed, coming from all directions at once. The door behind us slammed shut with force, trapping us inside. We tried to open it desperately, but it wouldn't budge. Meanwhile, the figure on the altar seemed to come to life. Its eyes began to glow with a malevolent light, and though it remained motionless in the center, it seemed to fill the entire room with its presence. A paralyzing terror took hold of us, and we began screaming, pounding on the door, calling for help, but no one was there. The voices returned, clearer, repeating with insistence, "Cursed, cursed, cursed." In an act of desperation, Marcus threw a chair at the window. The glass shattered, and the rusted bars gave way after tremendous effort. We escaped through that opening, despite cuts on our legs, and ran without the courage to look back. Back in our building, Mrs. Florence was in the hallway, holding her broom as always. She watched us with a look that mixed pity and disapproval. "I warned you to be careful," she said before entering her apartment again and closing the door. The days that followed were torment. Marcus and I tried to talk about what we had seen, but the experience had marked us deeply. The atmosphere in the building became oppressive, as if something sinister had followed us and settled there. Soon I realized Marcus began to change alarmingly. At first, he just seemed tired, but it quickly became clear there was something beyond stress. He was dejected, with dark circles under his eyes and a distant gaze. His hands trembled constantly, and he began avoiding any contact. I learned he had quit his job. When I tried to talk to him, his responses were monosyllabic and disconnected. His empty, terrified eyes seemed to have witnessed horrors he couldn't or wouldn't explain. One night, the noises in the building, banging and whispering voices, became unbearable. In the middle of the night, Marcus appeared at my door. He was sweating, pale, with desperation written all over his face. "I can't take it anymore. I can't go on like this," he said with a trembling voice. I invited him in, and we sat in the living room. He began to open up, telling me that whenever he closed his eyes, the same shadowy figures from the neighboring apartment appeared, pronouncing curses and horrible words. He said he felt a constant presence following him, even in moments of apparent tranquility. It was this feeling that led him to quit his job. He spoke about shadows lurking in corners and incessant voices that wouldn't let him sleep. Every word he said seemed to carry the weight of something consuming him slowly. As days passed, Marcus entered a frightening decline. He stopped leaving his apartment, gave in to drink, and disappeared for days. The noise and odor coming from his apartment began to bother other residents who didn't know how to handle the situation. One afternoon, while walking through the hallway, Mrs. Florence called me. Her expression was serious, and her voice carried an urgent tone. "He can't stay here anymore. What follows him is too dangerous for all of us. You need to take him back to the other building." I was perplexed by her words. Before I could question her, she quickly withdrew, closing the door behind her. Concerned, I tried to talk to Marcus, but he didn't respond. From the other side of the door, I heard uncontrolled laughter and the sound of breaking glass. Alarmed, I called the police. When the officers arrived and broke down the door, they found him in a deplorable state, surrounded by alcohol bottles, covered in wounds, and surrounded by bloodstains he had used to write incoherent words on the walls. He left there muttering incomprehensible phrases about shadows and voices, but seemed to no longer be present in the real world. That night, terror reached its peak. It seemed the entire apartment had come to life. The walls emitted strange sounds, and the shadows somehow moved on their own, ignoring any light source. Whenever I tried to sleep, I felt a presence at the foot of my bed, as if something was watching me intently. I would wake up gasping, with my heart racing, only to glimpse for fractions of seconds a sinister figure that disappeared as soon as I faced it completely. Completely desperate, I sought out Mrs. Florence again. After much insistence, she agreed to receive me in her small apartment, a space filled with religious images and flickering candles. Her voice was calm, but her tone showed the seriousness of what she was about to say. "You can't deal with this alone." She told the dark history of the neighboring building, describing how years ago it had been the site of obscure rituals performed by a cult. She spoke of sacrifices that awakened something that should never have been disturbed. This presence is still here, seeking more victims. Marcus got too close to the truth, and now it possesses him. He's not the first and won't be the last. Whatever they released has taken hold of his mind. He won't return. He's condemned to die in that place. Before I left, she gave me a blessed medal and a small bottle of holy water, along with some prayers written on a piece of paper. "Use this to protect yourself. Don't let your guard down." I returned to my apartment with a slight sense of security, though fear was still a constant weight. I followed her instructions carefully, spraying holy water in every corner of the house and praying the prayers with as much conviction as possible. The whispers that once filled the air diminished, but didn't disappear completely. That night I managed to sleep for a few hours, though my dreams were filled with disturbing images, dark and distorted figures moving in unsettling ways, as if surrounding me even in unconsciousness. Several days passed since that chaotic night of screams and incessant banging. The residents were divided between curiosity and fear. Some locked themselves in their apartments, while others ventured out, though nervously. Mrs. Florence, as always, maintained her vigil. She continued sweeping, but her restless eyes scanned the shadows as if anticipating something terrible emerging from them. One night, the tense silence that had taken over the building was broken by a group of young people seeking thrills. They carried spray cans and a speaker box, deciding to explore the old building next door. The idea was to tag the abandoned walls and feel the danger. However, what they found there was beyond any nightmare they could have imagined. As they climbed to the second floor, one of them noticed an ajar door with faint light escaping through its crack. As they approached, the putrid smell of decomposition hit them, accompanied by a bone-chilling cold. They pushed the door cautiously, and what they saw left them petrified. Marcus was there, sitting in a corner. His body was covered in dried blood, and his lost gaze seemed to pierce through space. His expression was a mix of suffering and despair. Around him, grotesque symbols were drawn with what appeared to be his own blood, while melted candle remains formed a circle at his feet. The young people screamed, and fear overwhelmed them completely. Their initial enthusiasm gave way to profound terror. The screams echoed through the building, attracting other residents who hesitantly emerged from their apartments to see what was happening. The scene was devastating. Beyond Marcus, there were marks on site suggesting the presence of other people, as if hidden witnesses had witnessed this macabre event. The arrival of authorities brought even more unease, but no answers. No one could explain what had happened to Marcus or the meaning of the symbols. That night sealed the building's fate, which now seemed charged with an even deeper darkness. For me, it was the end. The feeling of being trapped by fear and confusion became unbearable. I knew I needed to leave that place. I found a small, decrepit room in a nearby neighborhood, a miserable space with cracked walls and a damp smell that permeated the air. It was the type of place that reminded me of the worst moments of my life. But you know what? I didn't care. There was silence there. No dancing shadows, no terrifying whispers. It was a relief, even if soaked in poverty. The nights, however, were painfully lonely. What happened continued living in my memory, like a constant echo that couldn't be silenced. The questions about Marcus, about that building, about the horrors I witnessed were never answered, and it tormented me. Even in the relative comfort of my new home, I couldn't rid myself of the feeling that something still accompanied me. The whispers from the past seemed both distant and close, like a murmuring warning coming from the shadows of the old building. And deep down, I knew that silence, as comforting as it was only temporary. Something was patiently awaiting the right moment to collect its due for everything I had left behind. I once worked as a night caregiver for a 68-year-old woman with intellectual disabilities. Her daughter, Sarah, who was in her early 40s, had a night shift job and needed someone with medical knowledge to stay with her mother during the overnight hours. When I say I worked for them once, I mean literally one single night, and you'll soon understand why I never returned. The older woman's name was Margaret, but everyone called her Maggie. Sarah had contacted me through an agency, maybe because she didn't have other relatives available to help with her mother. Or perhaps she didn't want to, or couldn't afford a specialized care facility. Maybe she preferred the idea of hiring someone with specific experience to care for her during those crucial hours. At that time, I was already working as a caregiver for 2 other women with intellectual disabilities, so I had some practice. However, nothing I'd experienced before prepared me for what happened that night. Sarah left for work right as her shift started at 11 p.m. I'd already had a full day with another client, so my body was exhausted from trying to maximize my income. Before leaving, Sarah introduced me to her mother, who smiled gently before being led to her bedroom on the 2nd floor. It was approaching midnight when Sarah finally pulled away in her blue sedan. Sarah warned me that Maggie sometimes wandered the house confused during the early morning hours, and that I should help her return to her room if this happened. She was clear that this wasn't sleepwalking, but rather one of the symptoms of her mother's dementia. I assured her I was prepared to handle it. At the beginning of my shift, I sat in the living room watching my favorite crime drama. These jobs usually don't involve much excitement. Most of the time, you're just expected to be present. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily as I lost myself in the show. After about an hour, I heard footsteps coming from upstairs. I walked to the foot of the carpeted staircase and called up, "Maggie, is that you? Do you need anything?" I received no response, but heard the footsteps shuffle back toward the bedroom and a door close. I assumed she'd gone to the bathroom. I returned to the sofa and continued watching. Another hour passed. I got up to get a turkey sandwich from the refrigerator. On my way back to the living room, I nearly dropped the ceramic plate when I jumped in fright. Maggie was standing silently in the doorway, and there were shards of glass scattered across the kitchen floor. Startled, I apologized and asked if everything was all right. She immediately began screaming, "Who are you?" I explained that I was the caregiver hired to be there and ensure her well-being, but she didn't seem convinced. Maggie kept shouting, "Why are you here? I don't know you." With patience, I tried to remind her that we'd met just a few hours ago and that her daughter had hired me. This was enough to momentarily calm her, and I managed to lead her back to her room. Before leaving, I offered her a glass of water and a dose of melatonin, making sure she swallowed the pill. Several hours passed, and I was already exhausted. Sarah had told me I could use the guest room upstairs to rest if I needed to. I believed the melatonin would take effect, and that Maggie would remain at rest for the remainder of the night. So I lay down on the twin bed and fell asleep almost immediately. However, the rest lasted less than an hour. I awakened to a sound coming from downstairs, a constant noise, like something being hit with force at regular intervals of 1 or 2 seconds. I jumped up, leaving the bedroom door open to hear any movement from Maggie, something that was clearly happening now. I went to the stairs and immediately realized the sound was coming from the kitchen. I descended quickly, trying to be discreet. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I peered around the corner into the kitchen and saw a scene that could have come from a horror movie. In the darkness, Maggie was standing in front of the oven, repeatedly opening and closing the door with force. When I say I saw Maggie, I mean I could only make out her silhouette. The kitchen was almost completely dark. "Maggie," I shouted, and she stopped immediately. She turned in my direction, closed the oven door one last time, and began walking toward the stairs where I stood. "Are you okay?" I asked, this time in a low tone, heavy with tension. She approached close enough for her features to become visible. She looked at me with a completely blank expression, passed by without saying anything, and climbed the stairs. I followed, but as soon as she reached her room, Maggie slammed the door with force. I knocked back, calling out, "Maggie, are you all right?" No response. I opened the door slowly, just to peek inside. There she was, standing beside the bed, staring at the wall. I'd witnessed many strange situations in this line of work, but this was deeply unsettling. The kind of scene you expect to see only in movies. I approached her carefully, led her back to bed, and covered her with the down comforter. Before leaving, I hoped it would be the last time that night. "Good night, Maggie," I whispered, closing the door. I crossed the hallway to the guest room and lay down again. I planned to stay awake for at least 30 minutes in case she got up again, but I couldn't resist sleep. I fell asleep almost immediately. Later, I woke again. The room was completely dark, and the alarm I'd set for 1 hour hadn't gone off. I looked around, trying to understand what had awakened me, but saw nothing. Then I heard a sound coming from the closet. I looked at the partially open door, and in the crack, I saw the shadow of a head watching me from inside. My heart almost stopped. "Maggie," I called, but got no response. I kept calling her several times, until finally she pushed the closet door open and began walking slowly toward the bed. As she approached, she began repeating the words from earlier. "Who are you?" "I don't know you." I tried to calm her again, explaining who I was. I reached for the bedside lamp, and when I finally turned it on, my breath caught in my throat. Maggie was holding an enormous kitchen knife. At that moment, I realized my priority needed to be my own safety. "Maggie, put the knife down," I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. My scream seemed to make her even more nervous. She advanced another step, shouting the same phrases. "I don't know you," trying to calm someone in a dementia episode whose holding a knife wasn't part of what I was trained for in this job. I knew I needed to get out of there quickly. I plotted a route to get around her in the bedroom and put the plan into action. I leaped to the opposite side of the bed and again heard her desperate scream. "Who are you?" As I ran, I saw Maggie swing the knife through the air. The movement seemed slow and clumsy, but enough to make it clear she intended to use it. I rushed down the stairs, grabbed my purse and coat, slipped on my shoes, and fled the house. Instead of calling emergency services, I followed Sarah's instructions and contacted her directly. I did this carefully because involving the police rarely benefits anyone in situations like these. Sarah answered the phone in shock, screaming that I couldn't abandon her mother. Honestly, I screamed back that Maggie had tried to kill me, and that even so, I hadn't called the police. I explained that she needed to come home immediately. Outside, I remained alert, watching to ensure Maggie didn't leave the house while Sarah was on her way. When she finally arrived, she found her mother back in bed, apparently sleeping. Even so, Sarah initially accused me of exaggerating. However, upon finding the knife discarded beside Maggie's bed, her tone changed. To avoid further accusations or problems, I omitted the fact that I'd fallen asleep at some point during the night. But even so, I don't think I did anything wrong. Sarah knew about her mother's condition and had even offered me that room to rest. After that night, I never returned to that house. In my 9 years working as a direct caregiver, Maggie was by far the most frightening patient I've ever encountered. I live in Blackwater Ridge, a small town tucked away in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. But my name isn't important. What matters is the story I've never had the courage to tell anyone until now. It's about something I experienced when I was 16, something that defies what most consider natural. Back then, I started working to help with household bills. Since I attended night school in another part of town, I used my bicycle to commute everywhere, from home to work to school and back, without any fear, even when crossing rural areas after dark. I knew those roads well, and believed that my 6'3" frame and 190 pounds would be enough to deter any trouble. But on March 26, 2007, I discovered not everyone thought the same way. Returning from school, I decided to take a shortcut through a dirt path that crossed private property. The sky was clear, dotted with stars, and even without a full moon, visibility was perfect. After a rough day, the cool night air brought some relief as I pedaled along the trail. I could hear the usual rural sounds, goats bleating in the distance, dogs barking near an illuminated house, frogs croaking hidden nearby. Everything was peaceful until suddenly, the animal noises stopped, as if someone had flipped a switch. Only the wind, rustling through the trees, remained. Instinctively, I stopped to understand what was happening. That's when I saw something large, about the size of a donkey, moving among the farm animals. It grabbed something from the ground and awkwardly bolted toward the front of a nearby house. My first thought was that one of the guard dogs had escaped. I jumped back on my bike and started pedaling hard to get away. After all, farm dogs aren't usually small or friendly. As I distanced myself, an unbearable stench began to permeate the air, like a mixture of rotting garbage and sulfur. I pedaled faster, but as I rounded a narrow bend, I collided head-on with an enormous black animal crossing the trail toward the woods. I couldn't stop in time and hit the creature's side with full force. We both fell to the ground. The first thing I noticed was the thick, oily fur, followed by a sound that mixed growling and grunting. My mind still wanted to believe it was just a dog, but it wasn't. With my body aching, I quickly got up without taking my eyes off the creature. It also rose, and the image before me froze me in place. It was enormous, taller than me, with the appearance of a monstrous black dog, hairy and tailless. But its posture and body contour resembled something else. The muzzle, similar to a dog's, displayed sharp teeth, but there was something human about that face partially covered with fur. And the smell was nauseating. For a few moments, we stared at each other. My heart felt like it would explode in my throat, while my eyes tried to comprehend what they were seeing. Everything happened in seconds, but it felt like time had stopped. Then the beast put its hand, yes, hand to its abdomen where I had hit it, as if injured. It growled softly, then let out a deafening roar and lunged at me. My immediate reaction was to scream and use my bicycle as both shield and weapon. I hit and pushed that thing with it, trying to keep it away. In desperation, I headbutted its muzzle. I don't know if I connected properly, but the beast let out another roar while my head exploded with pain. Before I could do anything else, I received a violent blow to my chest that sent me flying. Then I felt a tug on my leg, followed by sharp impacts on my back, face, neck, and chest. The creature held me by one leg and slammed me to the ground with brutal force, as if I were a toy. The taste of blood filled my mouth, and my vision blurred as I felt crushing pressure on my head. I tried punching and kicking it with my free leg, but everything seemed useless. At that moment, I thought it was going to kill me right there. That's when I heard voices and dogs barking, rapidly approaching, followed by 4 or 5 gunshots. The creature finally released me. Yes, it had fingers, strong ones. It growled softly near my face, as if wanting to whisper something, then disappeared, running toward the woods. My head was spinning, but I tried to get up, only to be attacked by a pack of dogs that bit my legs and arms mercilessly. I don't know if any of them went after the monster, or if they were just focused on me. Thankfully, people arrived and drove the dogs away. As I tried to recover, still dazed, the property owner approached with a revolver in his hand and pointed it at me. "What the hell were you doing here?" he demanded. I could only laugh nervously. After everything, it seemed I was going to end up dead from a bullet or the dogs. Between laughs, I replied honestly, "I was actually hoping you could tell me." While some kept asking who I had been fighting with, a young man named Jackson, who had played basketball with me before, exclaimed, "Fight." "No way." I saw a huge beast run into the woods. The property owner retorted, "If it was just an animal, why's the boy talking?" The man, who must have been in his 60s, agreed to take me inside his house despite his wife's resistance. She didn't want any trouble. In the living room, still holding his revolver, he gave me a glass of water and asked, "Where do you live?" "Got a phone number to call your folks." At that time, we didn't have a phone at home, but a neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, did. His wife called her and gave her the address so my family could come get me. She explained that I had entered their property to take a shortcut and their dogs had attacked me, but assured them I was okay. I continued alternating between nervous laughter and crying, unable to believe what had just happened. When my parents arrived in our old Ford Taurus, along with my paternal grandmother who lived with us, I didn't even have a chance to thank the man for his help. My father quickly put me in the car and drove straight to the hospital. My left femur had dislocated from my hip socket, and the pain increased as the adrenaline wore off. At the hospital, the doctors took good care of me and suggested I stay overnight for observation. To be honest, I was relieved because I didn't want to go back home knowing I'd have to pass by that road again. But my grandmother was adamant, saying this was a family matter, and insisted so much that we ended up returning home that same night. On the way back, I told them every detail of what had happened. My father seemed terrified, bombarding me with questions. My mother, on the other hand, didn't believe me. She asked if someone had given me something strange at school, suggesting I might have been drugged and imagined a monster, while fighting with dogs. My grandmother remained silent. When we arrived home and I heard the door close, I broke down. I started crying like a small child and clung to my mother. My father tried to pull me close, but was interrupted by my grandmother, who took me by the hand and ordered me to go straight to the shower. "You stink," she said, and it was true. The smell of that creature still permeated my clothes. In the bathroom, leaning against the wall as the water ran down, I cried nonstop. The cuts and scratches stung, bled, and the pain in my head was constant. The consequence of having it nearly crushed like a fruit. Despite the anesthesia, my injured leg still bothered me. Even so, what hurt most was the memory of that encounter. When I came out of the shower, I found my family waiting for me with my favorite meal: steak, loaded baked potatoes, and corn on the cob. I've always had a voracious appetite, but that day I could barely nibble on some potatoes. It was impossible to swallow anything. I felt like the dirt and grass that creature had made me swallow were still inside me. During dinner, the conversation was tense. My father, not knowing how to handle the situation, started asking questions in German and Ukrainian, languages from our heritage. My grandmother observed me carefully, asking if I felt anything strange. My mother, meanwhile, persisted with the same questions as before, insinuating that I might be involved with drugs or something illicit. All this accumulated until I exploded, slamming my fist on the table and shouting, "Everything's fine. I'm not the lady's goddamn junkie brother. I just went for a little ride with a hairy dog thing on my bike, and as you can see, we ended up fighting in the woods." My father tried to calm me down and took me to my room. Still, sleep was impossible. I spent the night awake, looking out the window as the sky brightened. When morning came, my grandmother entered the room, whispering in Ukrainian. She told me not to go to work that day. That's when I remembered I'd already been fired the previous day, after less than 3 months on the job. But that seemed irrelevant now. My father seemed to accept everything with more tranquility. I spent the morning in my room, analyzing the consequences of the attack. I took off my clothes and observed each mark. A dislocated femur, 31 stitches between my chest and left shoulder, 15 on my forearm, 2 on my forehead, 2 on my lower lip. Additionally, there were bruises all over my body, countless scratches, and 6 dog bites. After a while, I went to the kitchen and sat talking with my grandmother while my parents left for work. Sitting at the table, I looked at her and confessed, "I don't know what happened. I got into a fight with some creature. I don't even know what it was. I hope it was a bear." My grandmother didn't hesitate. She responded in Ukrainian, using a word that meant werewolf. Although I had thought about it too, I preferred to laugh off the situation. The day passed quickly, but when night began to fall, something changed inside me. For the first time, I felt afraid of the dark. I just wanted to hide under the quilt and forget everything. However, each time I dozed off, that monster returned in my dreams, shaking me as if I were a toy. 2 days later, my father and grandmother suggested I move into the caretaker's house, which had been empty for some time. It would be a quiet place for me. The house was simple, with a small bedroom, a living room with a fireplace, a kitchen, and a tiny bathroom. My furniture barely fit, but I accepted without thinking much. Beyond the peace and quiet, I imagined that having my own space might open opportunities, especially with the daughter of one of my mother's cousins. I spent the next day anxious, almost forgetting what had happened. When Friday arrived, March 29th, 2007, my excitement only grew. I felt so hot that I seemed feverish. At night, I stripped down to my underwear, opened the window, and threw myself on the bed. As the heat increased, my wounds began to itch, and I gently ran my fingers over them, trying to relieve the discomfort. But the heat wasn't coming from outside. It was internal, as if I were burning from the inside out. After a few minutes, my eyes began to burn as if they were inflamed, and the sensation only worsened. Meanwhile, my vision changed. The world became as bright as day, but tinged with yellow and orange hues. The heat began to dissipate, but in compensation, a strange numbness took over my body. I moved my hands, but it seemed like they weren't mine. The sensation was surreal, like a confused dream or deep intoxication. You perceive what's happening around you, but have no control. When I looked at my body stretched out on the bed, I believed I was hallucinating. I tried to kneel to pray, but I couldn't. My bones cracked loudly, and my muscles seemed to writhe beneath my skin. There was no pain, but there was also no control. Suddenly, I realized I had fallen to the floor, looking up at the ceiling. That's when an unbearable smell filled the room. The same putrid odor of the creature that had attacked me days before. I was terrified, thinking it had come after me to finish what it started. Then the truth hit me like a punch. I was the creature. The transformation completed in a few minutes. I looked at myself in horror, unable to believe it. My mind was conscious, but my body was no longer mine. I felt everything, but it was as if I were trapped inside another entity. It was like a nightmare where you know you're inside the monster, but aren't the one giving the orders. An overwhelming feeling of sadness and repulsion took hold of me. I wanted to disappear. Without making a sound, the thing, or rather, I leaped through the open window with inhuman agility, jumped over the wall and ran through the streets, swift and stealthy. It was like being a passenger in my own body, forced to watch everything without being able to intervene. The creature avoided busy places, passing through deserted streets, abandoned lots, and wooded areas. I knew where it was going, as if my consciousness and intelligence were merging with its instincts. It was me, but it wasn't. Transforming is like being consumed by such intense rage that you lose control. You still know what's happening, but you're incapable of controlling yourself because of the primal needs that take over. Explanatory note: the basic needs of this condition include constant movement, feeding, and hunting. Interestingly, human and pig meat are not well accepted, often being vomited up. Attacks on humans generally occur due to extreme hunger, sexual frustration, or in some cases, simple mischief. The smell of human fear is almost addictive, something that provokes a particular state of euphoria. Most of the time, we don't have the desire to devour people. What we really seek is the smell of fear, of panic. For this, we do everything to provoke it. As skilled hunters, we can be completely silent and go unnoticed if we so choose. When we opt for noises and heavy footsteps, it's always intentional. The odor we exhale only serves to keep the curious away. However, if someone gets too close or physical contact occurs, we lose control and attack with impressive speed. I returned to where it all began, the dirt trail where I was attacked. I knew exactly what I wanted, the dogs. The first thing I did was sniff the air to make sure no other werewolf was around. I realized we're territorial. Where there's one, another doesn't establish itself. With the area clear, I easily jumped the wall. Knowing I was going to kill the dogs that had attacked me brought a strange feeling of satisfaction. I knelt, advanced without making a noise, slinking between the shadows. All the dogs were together. I stood up, observed, and in a few movements killed them. In this form, killing dogs is frighteningly easy. The yelps and commotion of the goats woke up Mr. Harmon. He came out of the house, already firing in all directions. I hid in the tall grass, lying down behind the corral without making a sound. From a distance, I heard his wife scream, "Carl." The beast killed the dogs. Harmon got to within about 15 feet of where I was. I stood up and released that terrible odor. The response was instantaneous. The smell of fear exhaled by him was almost intoxicating. He ran. Chasing someone overcome with terror is indescribable, almost pleasurable. I followed just to feel this up close, but he, desperate, turned the revolver backward. Before he could fire, I bit his forearm and plunged into the woods. An overwhelming fatigue took over me, and I simply blacked out. My grandmother woke me hours later, throwing a pair of shorts and a shirt over me. "I don't want to know anything. It's better that way." I got up and entered the house without saying a word, but something caught my attention. The abrasions had disappeared, and the stitches were dry, almost ready to fall out. Explanatory note: sunlight burns the werewolf's fur, making it fall off and disintegrate like ashes. At the same time, the light restructures the body, making it return to normal. When there's no access to sunlight, even indirect, the reverse transformation process is slower. I was worried about Mr. Harmon, thinking he might transform into something like me. In the following days, I observed him from a distance. To my surprise, nothing happened to him. He remained well, despite carrying a slight limp that I never understood. To this day, he has an issue with me, but his health remains good. Explanatory note: a simple bite is not enough to transmit the condition. The victim must face the attack, resist, and survive. This merit is what determines if the transformation will be passed on. Fleeing or succumbing to fear prevents this from happening. My grandmother passed away in 2017 of natural causes at 93. My mother lost her battle with cancer in 2019 at 54. My father, now 66, is in good health and continues living in the same house. As for the werewolf who attacked me, I had the impression when I was in Morgantown 2 years ago that she still lives around there. She's a woman the same age as my father. Of course, I won't introduce them. It would be too strange to explain to my father that his stepmother once left me covered in scratches and bites in the woods. He's past the age for that kind of adventure. That was the story of my first experience with the supernatural, and what an experience. Although others have occurred over time, none compares to the first, which is the most memorable. To conclude, I'll leave you with a curious detail as a bonus. The transformations are not as involuntary as movies make them seem, at least not after the first few. They're also not limited to full moon nights. They occur at specific times of the year, coincidentally during the solstices and equinoxes, regardless of the moon phase. And yes, it's possible to resist the transformation. Perhaps that's why werewolves aren't common in urban areas. Transforming in densely populated places isn't exactly the smartest idea. As for the rest, well, that remains a secret. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.